My sister's hand hit the back of my chair so hard, the legs scraped across the ballroom floor. The sound cut through the music and the clinking glasses around our table, and for one strange second, everyone close enough to hear us seemed to stop breathing. Amber stood beside me in her wedding dress, one hand still gripping the chair, her cheeks flushed beneath perfect makeup. "Get out," she said. "This table is for real family." I looked down at the sealed cream-colored envelope resting across my lap. Mom's handwriting ran across the front in the neat block letters she had used for grocery lists, birthday cards, and every appointment she had ever written into the paper calendar she refused to replace with an app, for my daughters open together. I had carried that envelope into Amber's reception because our mother had asked for one thing after she died, that neither of us read those words without the other. Until that moment, I had intended to honor it exactly. Amber followed my eyes and saw the handwriting. Something changed in her face. It was quick, too quick for anyone else at the table to notice. But I saw her mouth tighten before she looked back at me. "What is that?" "Something Mom left for us." Her fingers loosened from the chair. "Us?" "Yes." Dad sat 3 seats away. Thomas Dawson had always been good at becoming very interested in his plate whenever one of his daughters forced him to choose a side. I watched him lift his eyes toward the envelope. He stared at Mom's handwriting for a beat longer than made sense, then looked at me. I gave him a chance. I didn't ask him to defend me. I didn't ask him to explain Amber. I just waited to see whether the man who had spent my entire childhood telling us that family meant showing up would object when one daughter publicly told the other she didn't belong. Dad folded his napkin beside his plate. "Not today, Meredith. Not, Amber. Stop. Not, she's your sister. Not even. Sit down and lower your voices. Not today, Meredith." I almost laughed. It was so perfectly him that it hurt more than if he had shouted. Around us, Amber's new husband, Nathan, had gone rigid. An aunt at the other end of the table suddenly found the flower arrangement fascinating. Someone behind me whispered my name. Amber straightened her shoulders, apparently taking Dad's silence for support. "You heard him," she said. "I'm not doing this at my wedding." I slid the envelope into my purse and closed the clasp. Amber frowned. "What are you doing?" I pushed myself to my feet. "You can keep your family table. I'm taking Mom's last words with me." Her expression changed again, and this time I knew everyone saw it. She had expected me to argue. Maybe she had expected tears. Maybe she had expected me to sit there and accept whatever punishment she had decided I deserved because leaving would make me look dramatic. Instead, I picked up my coat. Dad finally stood. "Meredith." I turned toward him. His eyes went to my purse. That was the detail I remembered later. Not my face. Not the people watching us. The purse. "Don't make this worse," he said quietly. "You had your chance to make it better." I walked away before he could answer. My heels crossed the ballroom carpet, then the polished hotel lobby, while behind me, the reception slowly restarted, as if the bride had not just declared her own sister an outsider in front of half the family. I didn't look back. By the time the glass doors opened and January air hit my face, my hands were shaking, but my decision wasn't. If you're listening with me today, I hope you're doing well wherever you are. Stay with me, because what I thought was one cruel scene at my sister's wedding turned out to be only the beginning, and if you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happened next. I was 37 years old that night. I'm 38 now, telling this in August of 2026, 7 months after Amber's wedding. At the time, I thought the worst thing my sister had done was humiliate me in a ballroom full of relatives. I was wrong. I didn't know yet why Dad had stared at Mom's envelope the way he had. I didn't know why Amber's anger had sharpened the moment she recognized the handwriting. Most importantly, I didn't know that Mom had prepared for the possibility that one of them would try to stop me from hearing her. The envelope had come to me exactly 1 week earlier. On January 3rd, June Mercer called and asked if she could stop by my house. June had been Mom's friend for more than 20 years, the kind of friendship that had long ago stopped requiring invitations. She was the woman who knew which tea Mom hated, which neighbor she avoided, and exactly how much cinnamon belonged in the apple cake Mom made every fall. After Mom's mobility worsened, June had become a regular visitor. Amber actually encouraged it. Whenever June showed up with a book or a container of soup, Amber could leave for groceries or errands without feeling she had abandoned Mom alone. That Saturday, June arrived carrying no soup. She took off her gloves in my kitchen, sat at the table, and placed the cream-colored envelope between us. I knew Mom's handwriting before June turned it around. For my daughters opened together. For a few seconds, I couldn't touch it. Mom had died on October 25th. By January, the practical machinery after a death had already begun the probate notices, calls, paperwork, relatives asking what they could do, and then disappearing when the answer involved anything inconvenient. But grief didn't obey paperwork. Seeing Mom's handwriting brought back the stupidest detail, the way she used to test a pen on the side of her thumb before writing with it. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "Your mother gave it to me." "When?" "Before she got worse." I looked at June. "And you've had it this whole time?" "Yes." I didn't hide my irritation. "Why wait until now?" "Because Elaine told me to." June reached into her handbag and unfolded a small sheet of paper. She didn't hand it over. She read from it. "If I'm not there to do this myself, give the letter to Meredith 1 week before Amber's wedding. Meredith will respect the instruction. The wedding will put both girls in the same room." That sounded so much like Mom that my annoyance lost some of its footing. "Why me?" June folded the paper again. "Your mother believed you would keep it sealed. That's a lot of confidence. She knew you." I turned the envelope over. No writing on the back, no bulge from photographs or a thick stack of documents. It felt light. "Did she tell you what's inside?" "No." "Did you read it?" June gave me a look. "Right. Stupid question. She wanted you and Amber together when you opened it." I stared at those 4 words again. "For my daughters opened together." "Why the wedding? Why not after the funeral?" June took a moment before answering. She said she didn't want whatever she had to say swallowed up by a room full of grieving relatives. She believed the wedding would be the first time both of you were guaranteed to be in the same place after things settled. Things didn't exactly settle. "No," June said, "they didn't." I almost asked what she meant, but there was something closed in her expression. Not deceptive. Careful. So I put the envelope in the drawer beside my refrigerator and left it there for 7 days. I could have opened it. No one would have known. That matters because later, Amber accused me of using Mom's death whenever it benefited me. But on January 3rd, I had an unopened letter in my own kitchen, with no witness but myself, and I left it sealed because Mom had written one clear instruction. That wasn't sacrifice. It was respect. Mom cared about being respected, especially during the last year of her life. Her legs had started weakening badly in early 2025. By spring, she had stopped driving altogether. Inside the house, she could usually manage short distances with a walker, though on bad days, the trip from the bedroom to the living room exhausted her. For longer outings, she used a wheelchair. Amber later spoke about those months as if physical weakness had erased everything else about Mom. It hadn't. One afternoon that spring, I was sitting across from Mom at the dining room table while Dad sorted bills. Her walker stood beside her chair. Thomas read a total from a statement and reached for his checkbook. Mom held out her hand. "Let me see that." "It's right," Dad said. "Then you won't mind me looking." He slid the paper across the table. Mom adjusted her glasses, ran one finger down the page, and tapped a line. "You added the pharmacy charge twice." Dad looked again. She was right. Amber, who had been standing at the kitchen counter with Mom's phone, laughed. "This is why I keep telling you to let me put everything on your phone. The calendar, bills, appointments, you'd have it all in one place." Mom glanced toward the paper calendar hanging near her chair. Every square was filled with her handwriting. "Phones change things," she said. "Paper stays where I put it." At the time, it was just Mom being Mom. I remembered that sentence differently later. June arrived halfway through that afternoon carrying a mystery novel and a bag from the bakery. Amber greeted her with genuine relief. "Oh, thank God," she said. "Would you mind staying with Mom for an hour?" I need to pick up her prescription and get groceries. June laughed. Elaine and I survived raising children. I think we can survive an hour without you. Amber kissed Mom's cheek, grabbed her keys, and left. Nothing about it looked sinister. That was the problem. Amber didn't keep Mom locked inside a room. Dad didn't stand guard at the door. There were no chains, no hidden cameras, no dramatic moment where someone announced that I was banned from the house. It happened by inches. Mom was tired. Mom had therapy. Mom had slept badly. Mom needed less stress. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe next weekend. And because I had spent my adult life believing that love did not give me the right to force myself into someone else's space, I accepted more of those answers than I should have. But on January 10th, I still hadn't connected any of that to the envelope. All I knew was that Mom had asked Amber and me to open something together, so I carried it to the wedding. I never even got the chance to ask. After I left the ballroom, I stood under the hotel awning while wet snow pushed along the parking lot in dirty gray lines. I was waiting for the valet when June came through the doors. She didn't ask why I was leaving. She had seen enough. "Is it still sealed?" she asked. I took the envelope halfway out of my purse. "Yes." "You didn't ask her to open it?" I was working my way up to that between being told I wasn't family and being escorted out by the bride. June didn't smile. "She made you leave before you could open it together?" "Yes." Her face changed. "What?" "Nothing tonight." "June, go home, Meredith." I hated when people answered a question with an instruction. "If you know something, tell me. I know what Elaine told me to do. That's all I'm going to say right now." That irritated me enough that I nearly pushed harder. Instead, I stopped. June had kept Mom's first instruction for months. She wasn't going to break another one because I was angry in a hotel parking lot. I drove home with Mom's letter still sealed in my purse. The next morning, just after 10, my doorbell rang. June stood on my porch in the same navy coat she had worn the night before. This time, she carried a second envelope. She came inside, removed her gloves, and placed it on the kitchen table exactly where she had placed the first one a week earlier. My name was written across the front. For Meredith. I looked from the envelope to June. "There were two?" "Yes." "You knew that last night." "Yes." "And you couldn't tell me?" "Not until the condition your mother wrote down had been met." June turned the envelope over before giving it to me. Mom had written several lines on the back. "If Amber refuses to read my first letter with Meredith, drives Meredith away before it can be opened, tries to take it from her, or again claims to speak for me, give this to Meredith alone." I read it twice. A cold feeling settled under my ribs. "Again?" I asked. June met my eyes but didn't answer the question for me. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside were only 2 folded pages. No bank statements, no deed, no will. Nothing that looked like the explosive family secret my imagination was already trying to manufacture. I unfolded the first page. Mom's handwriting was shakier than it had been on the envelope, but still unmistakably hers. The first sentence stopped me before I could read another word. "Do not confront your father yet." I read the sentence 3 times, partly because it sounded so much like Mom, and partly because it was the last instruction I wanted from her. My first instinct was already to call Dad. I wanted to ask why he had stared at the first envelope at Amber's wedding, why he had tried to stop me from leaving with it, and why Mom had apparently believed I would need to be warned against speaking to him. June sat across from me at the kitchen table and watched me turn the page without asking what Elaine had written. Mom had dated the letter the 18th of September 2025, a little more than 5 weeks before she died. Her handwriting was smaller than it used to be, but the language was sharp. She wrote that losing strength in her legs had changed the practical details of her life, not her ability to decide what happened to it. At first, needing rides had meant exactly that someone drove her somewhere she could no longer drive herself. Then, slowly enough that she had almost missed it, help had begun turning into permission. She didn't write that Dad had stolen from her. She didn't write that Amber had forged anything, tricked her into signing a deed, or emptied an account. Mom was too precise for accusations she couldn't prove. What she wrote was worse in a quieter way. Thomas and Amber had started answering questions before anyone asked her. scheduling things around what they thought was best, and describing decisions as settled before she had agreed to them. Then came the sentence that made me set the pages down. Start with April 17th. Ask June for the April file. And Meredith, your father will tell you this was Amber's idea. Check before you believe him. I looked across the table. What's the April file? June didn't pretend she didn't know. She reached down beside her chair, lifted the leather tote she had brought in, and rested it against her leg. I'll give it to you. You brought it with you? Yes. And you were going to wait until I finished reading before mentioning that? Your mother was very specific about the order. I leaned back in my chair and pressed my fingers against my forehead. Of course she was. June almost smiled, but the expression faded quickly. She knew how you react when you think someone has crossed a line. I react by asking them about it. You react by asking them about it immediately. That's generally when questions are useful. She thought you might warn someone before you understood what you were warning them about. I didn't like hearing that. The worst criticism is usually the one that recognizes something you have spent years calling a strength. I had always thought of myself as direct. If I had a problem with you, you heard it from me instead of from 3 cousins, a group text, or someone's husband 2 weeks later. Mom admired that about me until she didn't, apparently. I picked up the letter again. She wrote that if she had been wrong, if what bothered her turned out to be nothing more than poor communication and family members trying too hard to help, then she wanted that truth too. But she wanted me to begin with what she had actually said and done, not with what anyone claimed she meant. She ended that page with a sentence I would think about for months afterward. When people speak for you often enough, eventually everyone forgets to ask whether you ever said the words yourself. That sentence pulled me backward through the previous year. The first memory seemed harmless even after I examined it. It had been sometime in late May when I called Amber on a Saturday morning and told her I planned to bring lunch to Mom. Amber said Mom had just finished physical therapy and was exhausted, then asked if I could come Sunday instead. I had heard Mom complaining about therapy fatigue before, so I changed my plans without argument. When I went over the next afternoon, Mom seemed tired but normal, and I never asked whether she had actually wanted me there the day before. Another time, Dad called before I left work. Your mother's having a rough week, he said. I think all the visits are wearing her out. All the visits? People coming and going. June, neighbors, you, Amber handling appointments. She needs less stress. I had asked whether Mom said that herself. Dad paused, then answered. She doesn't need to have to say everything, Meredith. I'm her husband. I can tell when she's exhausted. That had irritated me, but not enough. I told him I would give her a few days and call her directly. At the time, I thought I was refusing to become another person who hovered over a sick woman and treated her like a child. The third memory was harder to dismiss. I had called Mom on a Wednesday evening in July. Amber answered Mom's phone and said she was helping her organize medication. I asked to speak with Mom anyway, and a few seconds later I heard Mom's voice. Hey kiddo, you sound tired. I am tired. I can come over tomorrow and bring dinner. There was a pause. In the background, Amber asked, Mom, did you take the evening one or just the afternoon one? Mom answered her, then came back to me. Maybe another day, honey. Are you sure? I'm fine. That was all. I had told myself that a 64-year-old woman who had spent my entire childhood enforcing boundaries could tell me when she wanted company. I had refused to be the daughter who barged in because she believed her need to feel useful mattered more than Mom's need to rest. And somewhere underneath that reasonable explanation was something less flattering. Pride. If someone told me twice that I wasn't wanted, I stopped knocking. Sitting at my kitchen table with Mom's letter in my hand, I could finally distinguish the two things. Amber had lied to me about access. Dad had reinforced those limits. That belonged to them. But once I believed I had been rejected, I had made it easier for them by deciding I was too proud to keep verifying where the rejection was actually coming from. I wasn't going to rewrite that into some noble confession that I had failed Mom equally. I hadn't. The person building a locked gate and the person who stops rattling it are not committing the same act. but I could admit I had stopped rattling it too soon. June watched me fold the letter back along its original creases. "You're angry. I'm trying not to be." "That's not what I said." "No, I'm furious. And you're not calling Thomas." I glanced toward my phone. June raised an eyebrow. "I'm not calling him." "Good. Please don't look so surprised." "I'm not surprised. I'm relieved." She pulled the tote onto her lap and took out a blue paper folder. It was thin. I had expected something larger after everything Mom's letter implied. Maybe the kind of movie evidence file that contained neatly labeled bank statements and a confession conveniently signed by everyone involved. What June placed in front of me looked almost disappointing. "That's it? That's everything Elaine gave me under that name." Inside was a photocopy of one page from Mom's paper calendar, an appointment card, a business card, one copied financial statement, and a piece of yellow legal pad paper covered with Mom's handwriting. No deed. No amended will. No giant transfer document waiting to prove a crime in one glance. The calendar page was April 2025. Mom had circled Thursday the 17th. Next to the date, in small writing, she had put MH11. Underneath that were 4 words. "Not PT, said no." Below them, written later in darker ink, was another note. "Tom came home angry." I stopped breathing for a moment. "Physical therapy," I said. June nodded. "That's what I was told she had that day." "I know." My head came up. "How do you know?" "Elaine told me." "When?" "Later. Not that day." I looked back at the calendar. I could remember April 17th because I had tried to visit after work. Amber had texted me before lunch saying Mom had physical therapy and might be worn out afterward. I had written back that I would come Friday instead. There had been nothing strange enough in that exchange to preserve in my memory until now. The appointment card had the same date and time, but no physical therapy clinic was printed across it. It read, Hale Estate and Property Council, followed by a Grand Rapids address and the name Martin Hale. The business card belonged to the same man. What was Mom doing there? "I don't know exactly." "You never asked?" "Of course I asked. Your mother told me she wasn't ready to explain something she hadn't proven." That answer frustrated me because it sounded sensible. I picked up the copied statement. Most of it meant nothing to me without context. There were payments for medical expenses, utilities, insurance, groceries, and several transfers that could have been completely ordinary inside a marriage that had lasted nearly 40 years. One amount had been marked with a question mark in Mom's handwriting, but she had not written an accusation beside it. "This doesn't prove anything." "No." "Did Mom think it did?" "No." "Then why keep it?" "Because she wanted to remember what to ask." That sounded like Mom, too. I read the yellow note again. "Not PT. Said no. Tom came home angry." It proved one thing with certainty. Someone had lied to me about where Mom was on April 17th. My phone rang before I could decide which question to ask June next. "Dad." June saw the screen and said nothing. For several seconds, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Then I remembered Mom's instruction was not, "Don't speak to your father." It was, "Do not confront your father yet." I answered, "Hi, Dad." His voice was unusually careful. "You home?" "Yes. I wanted to talk about last night. If this is about Amber's wedding," she already made herself clear. "I'm not calling about the seating." Of course he wasn't. "What are you calling about?" A pause. "The envelope." I looked at June. "What about it?" "Your mother meant that for both of you." "I'm aware. It's written on the front." "Then maybe you should bring it here." "Why?" "So the family can handle your mother's things together." I almost smiled at the word family. Less than 24 hours earlier, Dad had sat silently, while Amber informed an entire table that I didn't qualify. "The letter is still sealed," I said. "Good. Keep it that way." Something in his tone tightened my grip on the phone. "Why?" "I just don't want this becoming another fight. Amber's upset. You're upset. Everyone's emotional after the wedding." "Mom wrote the instruction, Dad, not Amber." "I know that." "Then I'll follow Mom's instruction." "Meredith." "What?" He breathed out slowly. "Just bring me the envelope." There it was. Not a request to bring Amber over. Not an offer for the 3 of us to sit down together. "Bring me the envelope." I could feel the old version of myself reaching for the question that would blow everything open. Where did you take Mom on April 17th? Why did she write that she said no? What did you ask her to sign? Instead, I looked at Mom's second letter beside my hand. Do not confront your father yet. I have to go, I said. Don't do anything with that letter until we talk. I'm not promising you that. I ended the call before he could answer. June exhaled through her nose. Your mother would be proud of you. Because I hung up on my father? Because you didn't ask about April 17th. I came close. I could tell. I slid the phone across the table as if putting distance between us would make it harder to call him back. He didn't ask what Mom wrote. He asked me to give him the envelope. June's mouth tightened. What? Nothing I can prove. Everyone keeps saying that today. Maybe because your mother trained us well. June left shortly after noon, taking nothing with her except her tote. The April file stayed with me because Mom had instructed that it go to me after letter 2. I photographed every page, then put the originals in a document box in my home office rather than carrying them around in my purse. I still didn't know whether I was protecting evidence of wrongdoing or a collection of misunderstandings, and I wasn't interested in pretending suspicion was proof. At 4:30 that afternoon, June called. Thomas contacted me. I sat straighter at my desk. What did he want? To know whether Elaine left anything else with me. What did you tell him? That I had followed Elaine's written instructions. My stomach tightened. You said written instructions? Yes. What did he say? He asked what instructions, and I told him they were Elaine's, not his. Despite everything, I smiled. How did he enjoy that? He didn't. Did you tell him about the second letter? No. The April file? No. Anything else? No. And before you ask, I didn't record the call. I'm telling you what I personally heard. That detail mattered. June wasn't offering me a dramatic piece of evidence. She was telling me a conversation she had participated in. Did he sound scared? I asked. I can tell you he became much more insistent after I mentioned written instructions. I can't tell you what was in his head. Mom would have approved of that answer. The next day, January 12th, Amber texted me at 9:14 inches the morning. Did you open Mom's letter? I didn't answer immediately. At 9:26, another message appeared. Meredith, I'm serious. Did you open it? I stared at the screen. 24 hours earlier, my sister had been willing to throw me out of her wedding rather than let me sit at a table with relatives. Now she couldn't wait 12 minutes for an answer. No, I wrote, it's still sealed. 3 dots appeared almost immediately, disappeared, then appeared again. Finally she sent, don't open it without me. I almost replied that this had been the plan before she physically shoved my chair backward. Instead, I put my phone down. The message told me enough. At the time, I didn't know exactly what had changed between Saturday night and Tuesday morning. I knew Dad had called me for the envelope. I knew he had called June to ask what else Mom left. I knew June's phrase, written instructions, had bothered him enough that he pushed for details she refused to give. I would learn later that after speaking to June, Dad had gone to Amber and told her Elaine had apparently left instructions beyond the envelope she had seen at the wedding. Amber later admitted he also told her something he had never told me. Before Mom died, she had challenged him about what happened on April 17th. I did not witness that conversation, and I didn't know about it on January 12th. All I knew then was that Amber had gone from humiliating me over Mom's envelope to making sure I didn't open it without her. Wednesday morning, January 13th, I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when someone started knocking on my front door. Not ringing the bell. Knocking. I looked through the side window and saw Amber standing on the porch. 3 days earlier, she had been wearing satin, diamonds, and the expression of a woman who believed 200 people belonged to her for the night. Now her hair was pulled into a loose knot, there was no makeup around her eyes, and she had thrown a winter coat over leggings and a sweatshirt. She looked less like a newlywed than someone who had driven across town before deciding what she was going to say. I opened the door but didn't move aside. What? Can I come in? You seemed pretty clear about where I belonged on Saturday. Her jaw tightened. Meredith, please. The word caught my attention more than an apology would have. Amber was many things, but she hated begging. What do you want? Her eyes moved past me toward the kitchen, as if she expected to see the envelope sitting in plain sight. Did you open it? I told you I didn't. Do you still have it? Yes. She closed her eyes for half a second. Relief, or something close enough to relief that I could observe it without pretending I knew why. Then she looked at me and said, "Please, I have to know what Mom left us. Not what Mom wrote. Not what Mom wanted to say. What Mom left us." I heard the distinction immediately. So this is about what you think is inside? It's Mom's last letter. That isn't what I asked. Amber glanced toward the street. Can we not do this on the porch? I let her inside because I wanted answers, not because 3 days had erased anything. She sat at my kitchen table in the same chair June had used. I stayed standing until she finally looked up at me. Where's the envelope? Safe. Meredith, before I bring it out, tell me why you're suddenly desperate to read something you were perfectly willing to let me walk away with 3 nights ago. I was angry. You were married. You know what I mean. No, I know what you did. She pressed her lips together and looked away. I could have shown her letter too then. I could have put the April file on the table and watched her face when she saw the date. I could have asked why she told me Mom was at physical therapy when Mom had actually been sitting in an estate attorney's office saying no to something. I did none of those things. For once, I listened to my mother. If we open letter 1, I said, we follow her instruction exactly. Amber looked back at me. Meaning? We open it together. Fine. And June is here. The answer came too quickly. Why? Because Mom trusted her with the letter. That doesn't mean she needs to sit in on our family business. There was that phrase again. Family business. I pulled out the chair across from her and finally sat down. 3 days ago, I wasn't real family. Today you're at my house asking me to open Mom's final letter because it's family business. You don't get both versions whenever they're convenient. Amber's face flushed. I said something horrible. Fine. I'm sorry. It was the kind of apology people make when the apology is standing between them and something they want. June is there, I repeated. Amber stared at me. For the first time since she arrived, she wasn't looking toward the room where she thought Mom's envelope might be. She was looking directly at me, and whatever calculation she was making had changed. Finally, she said, "Okay," but she didn't sound relieved anymore. That was when I understood something I hadn't understood at the wedding. Amber wasn't most afraid of the sealed letter. She was afraid of the woman Mom had trusted to carry it out of the house. Amber's agreement did not make me trust her. It only told me she wanted the first envelope opened badly enough to tolerate June being in the room. I called June while Amber was still sitting at my kitchen table. I kept the call short and told her exactly what had happened. Amber had come over. She wanted to open Mom's first letter, and she had agreed June could be present. June said she would come over. Amber listened without interrupting, but the moment I put my phone down, she asked how long June would take. Maybe 30 minutes. Amber glanced toward the hallway. You really don't have the letter in here? No. Where is it? Safe. She rubbed her palms over her knees. You're acting like I'm going to steal it. I watched you shove my chair away from a table 3 days ago because I had it. That wasn't why. Then tell me why. She looked away. I was angry. That explains the shove. It doesn't explain why you suddenly care this much about what Mom wrote. Amber gave me the same answer she had already given. Because she was our mother. It was technically true, which made it useless. I went to make coffee and didn't offer her any. That sounds petty now, and maybe it was. But I wasn't trying to turn myself into a saint in retrospect. My sister had thrown me out of her wedding on Saturday and arrived at my house on Tuesday, demanding access to something Mom had left. She could survive 40 minutes without hospitality. While I waited for June, I asked one question I had deliberately held back. What did Dad tell you after he called June? Amber's head came up. What do you mean? Dad called June after the wedding. He asked whether Mom left anything else with her. June told him she had followed Mom's written instructions. The next morning, you started texting me about the letter, so either you developed a sudden respect for Mom's correspondence overnight, or Dad told you something. Amber stared at me long enough that I knew I had hit the right place. Finally, she said, He said June made it sound like Mom had planned more than one thing. What else? That's it. I waited. Amber exhaled hard. He also said Mom had been upset with him before she died. About what? I don't know. You came to my house before 9 in the morning because Dad said Mom had been upset with him? He said she brought up some old meeting. I didn't move. What meeting? Amber's eyes dropped to the table. April 17th? I asked. Her face answered before her mouth did. That was the first time I knew for certain that the date on Mom's calendar meant something to Amber too. Before I could push further, the doorbell rang. June came in carrying a flat document case under one arm. She looked from me to Amber, then took off her coat without comment. The three of us sat at the kitchen table where Mom's second letter and April file had been the day before. I had already put those away. Amber still did not know they existed. I brought out the first envelope. The cream paper looked almost ordinary sitting between us. Mom had written 4 words across it, and somehow those words had already managed to drag all 3 of us into the same room. For my daughters opened together. June looked at the seal. Still unopened? Yes. Amber crossed her arms. Can we just do this? I looked at her. You wanted June here. I agreed to June being here. Then we do it properly. I slid one finger under the flap and broke the seal. Inside were 4 handwritten pages. I unfolded them carefully and placed them flat on the table so Amber could see. June stayed slightly back, as if she understood that being a witness did not make the letter hers. Mom began the way I expected her to begin. My girls, if you are reading this together, then I did at least one thing right. I spent too much of my life assuming the 2 of you would eventually understand each other without anyone saying the difficult things aloud. That was unfair to both of you. Amber's expression softened for the first time that morning. Mine probably did too. Mom wrote that she loved us both. She wrote that illness had made everyone impatient in different ways. Amber had tried to solve everything before it became a problem. I had responded to pressure by stepping back until I could think clearly. Dad hated conflict so much that he often called silence peace. That line made me glance at June. She lowered her eyes. Then Mom's letter changed. There are things I need both of you to understand before anyone talks about property, inheritance, or what I would have wanted. There were decisions being made about my property that I did not make. Amber stopped moving. I felt it more than saw it. I read the sentence again, this time aloud. There were decisions being made about my property that I did not make. Amber said, "Keep reading." Her voice had lost its impatience. I did. Mom wrote that needing help with transportation had gradually become something else. At first, she needed rides. Then people began arranging appointments around her. Then they began describing choices as settled before she had agreed to them. Needing help walking did not make me unable to think. I had to stop there. The sentence was so simple that it made everything Amber and Dad had said during Mom's last months sound uglier than it had at the time. Mom continued, "Amber, tell your sister what happened on April 17th. Tell her why she was told I was at physical therapy. Tell her where you and your father actually took me. If you tell her the truth, Meredith, listen before you judge your sister. You may not know yet how this began." I lowered the page. Amber was staring at Mom's handwriting. "Okay," I said. "Tell me." She didn't answer. June remained silent. I waited until Amber finally looked at me. It wasn't physical therapy. I know that much. It was an appointment with Martin Hale. Her eyes flicked toward mine. "You already know his name? I asked you what happened." "Not what I know." Amber leaned back. "Dad wanted to get some estate paperwork cleaned up." "What does that mean?" "Exactly what I said. Mom was having more trouble getting around. Dad was worried that if she got worse, everything would become complicated." "Everything?" "The cottage, some accounts, property paperwork." I kept my voice level. "Why the cottage?" Amber's mouth tightened. "Because it was still only in Mom's name. It was Mom's. It was family property. There it was. The phrase Dad had used for years whenever the distinction between his and Mom's mattered less to him than what he wanted. I asked, "What was she supposed to sign?" "Something that would make it easier for Dad to handle the cottage." "And you?" Amber hesitated. "And you?" I repeated. There was discussion about me being included. Included how? I don't know the exact legal language. You went to the appointment. I wasn't the lawyer, Meredith. You weren't at physical therapy either, but that's what you told me. Her face flushed. That answer came too fast for her to take it back. I sat very still. Why? Because you turn everything into an investigation. Apparently he was right to worry. That's not what I meant. Then explain it. Amber pushed her chair back an inch, then stopped. He thought you'd scare Mom by asking what she was signing? You always did that. Every time there was paperwork, you acted like nobody else could understand it. That landed because there was enough truth inside it to sting. I did ask questions. I did read things twice. I did sometimes sound like I assumed everyone else had skipped a page. But that wasn't an answer. Why did you tell me she was at physical therapy? Amber looked at June, maybe hoping for rescue. June didn't give it. Finally, Amber said, Dad said there was no reason to start a fight before we knew whether Mom would even agree. So you lied to keep me away. It wasn't some conspiracy. Then what do you call it? I call it one appointment. I looked down at Mom's letter. Did she sign? No. The answer came immediately. No? She refused. What did she say? Amber shook her head. I don't remember every word. She said she didn't want to change the cottage. Anything else? She said she understood what Dad was asking and didn't want to do it. That mattered. Not confusion. Not hesitation. Not, I'll think about it. No. What did Dad do? He was angry. Then we went home. And that was it? Amber nodded. That was it. I thought of the note on Mom's calendar. Not PT. Said no. Tom came home angry. At least that part matched. Amber leaned forward as if matching one fact should erase the lie around it. Nothing happened, Meredith. That's what you need to understand. Mom said no. Nothing changed. If nothing happened, why lie about where she was? Because Dad didn't want you making everything worse. You keep saying that like it explains something. It does if you know yourself. I almost snapped back. Instead, I remembered the first line of Mom's second letter. Do not confront your father yet. It was beginning to occur to me that the instruction applied to Amber too. Mom had not told me to trust either of them. She had told me to check. So I returned to the first letter. The next section was written directly to Amber. I know you believed some of what your father told you. I also know there came a point when you had enough information to question it. Those are not the same thing. Amber's face went pale. I stopped reading. What does that mean? I don't know. You look like you know. I said I don't. I read on. Meredith, do not assume this began with your sister. Amber made choices of her own, and she will have to answer for them. But if your father tells you she created the situation, do not accept that because it is convenient. Check. For several seconds, the room was completely quiet. Amber's hands, which had been clasped together on the table, separated. She stared at the letter. Then she said, Dad was scared. It was such a strange response that I almost laughed. I didn't ask whether he was scared. He was. Of what? Mom getting worse. Money. The house. Everything. What money? Amber shook her head. I don't know all of it. You knew enough to lie to me. That doesn't mean I knew everything. I watched her carefully. Did Dad come up with the April appointment? Amber looked down. Amber. Yes. It was barely audible. Did you? No. Did he tell you what he wanted before you took Mom there? He said he wanted to simplify things. That isn't what I asked. She looked up, angry now. I knew he wanted more control of the cottage. I didn't think he was stealing it from her. He was her husband. And Mom? What about Mom? She was the owner. Amber opened her mouth and then closed it again. I picked up Mom's letter. There were still 2 pages left. Mom wrote that the cottage itself was not the point. She had inherited it from her parents, and she had always intended to decide what happened to it after her death. She did not write who would receive it. She did not reveal percentages or announce some dramatic disinheritance. Instead, she wrote something much more difficult for Amber and Dad to dismiss. If I choose to give something away, that is generosity. If someone decides I would eventually give it to them anyway, that is not permission. I looked at Amber. She didn't look back. Mom described the language around her changing over the summer. People stopped saying they were helping her with bills and started saying they were managing them. They stopped asking whether she wanted to go somewhere and started telling others she was too tired to go. She wrote that she had begun paying attention to who spoke for her and who still asked her. Then she wrote one line to me. Meredith, you were not wrong to respect my independence. You were wrong to assume everyone around me was respecting it too. I felt that one in my chest. There was no absolution in it. No accusation either. Just accuracy. I had always treated autonomy as something you proved by backing away when someone asked for space. Mom was telling me that sometimes the space itself could be manufactured. The final paragraph addressed both of us. I am not asking either of you to punish the other. I am asking you to stop letting anyone turn my dependence into consent. Find out what I said yes to. Find out what I said no to. Then let my decisions be mine. That was where the letter ended. No hidden fortune. No new will. No dramatic declaration that one daughter was good and the other evil. Just an instruction to verify. Amber reached for the pages. I put my hand over them. Her eyes flashed. It's mine, too. I know. Then let me see it. You've been looking at it the entire time. I want a copy. That was reasonable. I removed my hand. You can photograph every page? She looked surprised. What? You heard me. You're not keeping it from me? Mom wrote it to both of us. I'm not going to do to you what you did to her. Amber's face tightened. She took out her phone and photographed each page carefully. June watched her without comment. When Amber finished, I folded the letter and returned it to the envelope. Then I asked June, when did Mom start talking to you about any of this? June considered her answer before giving it. She didn't tell me she thought Thomas was stealing from her. I didn't ask that. I know. I'm making the distinction because she made it. Amber rolled her eyes. Here we go. June ignored her. Elaine started complaining that the words people used around her were changing. At first, she said Thomas was helping with bills. Then she said he was managing things. Later, she told me everyone had started talking about what would be easier after she was gone. Did she seem confused? No, Amber leaned forward. June, she had good days and bad days. With walking, with pain, with fatigue. You weren't there every day. No, I wasn't. Amber seemed relieved until June continued. But when I was there, Elaine knew who I was, what day it was, what she owned, and what she did not want to sign. She complained when I brought the wrong brand of tea. She corrected me when I misremembered what year we went to Traverse City. I never saw anything that made me think she couldn't understand a conversation about her own property. Amber looked away. I asked June, did Mom ever tell you exactly what happened in Martin Hale's office? No. Did she tell you what the document was? No. Did she tell you whether Dad went back? June shook her head. No. That answer frustrated me, but it also made me trust her more. June was not turning herself into a witness to things she had never seen. Amber stood. Are we done? No, I said. She gave me a tired look. What else? Why did Dad tell you Meredith was going to take the cottage? Her body went rigid. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Mom wrote that you believed some of what Dad told you. You just said he wanted more control because he was scared. You've spent 20 minutes acting like my questions were the threat. So what exactly did he tell you about me? Amber picked up her coat. Ask him. Mom specifically warned me not to accept his version. Then I guess you'll have to figure it out. She moved toward the door. I didn't stop her. That mattered too. I wasn't going to chase my sister through my own house begging for a confession. She had given me something useful, whether she intended to or not. April 17th was not a misunderstanding. Dad had arranged a meeting about Mom's cottage. Amber had helped hide it from me. Mom had clearly refused. And Mom herself believed Thomas might eventually try to blame Amber for starting the whole thing. After Amber left, June and I sat quietly for a minute. Then I took Martin Hale's business card from the April file. The office was in Grand Rapids, less than 20 minutes from my house. Under his name were the words estate planning and real property. I called the number. A receptionist answered, and after I explained who I was, she put me on hold. I expected a message or an appointment request. Instead, a man came on the line a few minutes later. "This is Martin Hale." "Mr. Hale, my name is Meredith Dawson. Elaine Dawson was my mother." There was a pause. "I remember Elaine. I found your card among papers she left with a friend. I'm calling about April 17th. His voice changed immediately, not colder, exactly, but professional. "I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Dawson. I need to be careful here. Your mother was a client. I can't discuss her file with you simply because you're her daughter. I understand." I didn't entirely, but I understood enough not to argue. "Our estate has an independent personal representative," I said. "Then that is who should contact my office. I'm listed under Mom's will. That does not make you the representative." "I know. This time I actually did." Probate had opened in November. Mom's 2022 will had nominated an independent professional instead of Dad, Amber, or me to administer the estate. I had been grateful for that even before I knew there was anything worth fighting about. It meant no one in our family got to control the paperwork simply by being the loudest person in the room. I glanced at the appointment card. "Can I ask one thing that doesn't require you to tell me what was in the file?" "You can ask. When you met my mother on April 17th, did you have any reason to think she couldn't speak for herself?" Martin was quiet for a few seconds. When he answered, he chose his words carefully. "I'm not going to discuss the substance of our meeting with you, but I can say I did not conduct that meeting on the assumption that someone else needed to speak for Elaine." My hand tightened around the phone. "She spoke for herself?" "Yes. That was all he gave me. It was enough." I thanked him and ended the call. June was watching me. "He won't tell me what happened." "He shouldn't. He said the personal representative has to request the file." "That sounds right." I took out my phone again. This time I did not call Dad. I called the independent personal representative handling Mom's estate. I had spoken with her several times since November about routine probate matters. Until that morning, our conversations had involved inventory forms, insurance on the cottage, utilities, and documents. I had never expected to matter emotionally. When she answered, I told her I had found materials Mom left outside the house before she died, and that one of them pointed to an April meeting involving the cottage. She asked exactly the kind of questions I needed someone to ask. "Do you have originals?" "Yes." "Where are they?" "With me." "Keep them secure. Send me copies first." I also have a letter from Mom, dated September 18th. "What does it say?" I summarized instead of dramatizing. I told her Mom had instructed me not to confront Dad yet, had directed me to April 17th, and had written that decisions about her property were being made that she did not make. Does the letter identify a transaction? No. Does it accuse Thomas of stealing? No. Good, then don't turn it into that. The bluntness steadied me. I'm not trying to. I know. I'm telling you what I would tell any beneficiary. Suspicion is not proof. A handwritten letter can point us toward records, but it doesn't replace them. I understand. Send me copies of the letter, the calendar page, the appointment card, and the statement. Do not contact the bank asking for account histories yourself. I'll handle estate requests through the proper channels. What about Martin Hale? I'll contact him. He told me the same thing. That's what he should have told you. I almost laughed. Apparently, the professionals in Mom's life had all decided my education that week would involve hearing no. I emailed the copies while we were still on the phone. She confirmed receipt. Then she became quiet. "Meredith?" "Yes?" "If your mother went into an attorney's office on April 17th and clearly refused a change involving the cottage, that refusal matters." I looked at Mom's calendar lying beside my hand. "Not PT," said no. The personal representative continued. "I'll request Hale's file. And if your mother refused something there, I want to know what your father tried to do after that refusal." The personal representative's question stayed with me after the call ended. If Mom had clearly said no on April 17th, what did Dad try to do after that refusal? I wanted the answer immediately. That was the part of me Mom had anticipated when she wrote, "Do not confront your father yet." I could have driven to Dad's house that afternoon, put the appointment card on his kitchen table, and demanded an explanation. Instead, I spent the rest of the day doing something much less satisfying and much more useful. I made copies of everything I had, labeled them by source, and wrote down what each piece actually proved. Mom's calendar proved she had gone somewhere connected to Martin Hale on April 17th, not physical therapy, and that she had written, "said no." Amber's admission proved she had helped Dad conceal the purpose of that appointment from me, and that Mom had refused whatever change he wanted involving the cottage. Mom's letter proved she believed decisions were being made about her property without her agreement. None of it yet proved Dad had taken $1 he wasn't entitled to use. I wrote that sentence at the bottom of the page because I needed to see it. Suspicion was not proof. By the next morning, I had convinced myself Martin Hale was probably the missing link. His office name bothered me, Hale Estate and Property Council. Dad had wanted to change something involving Mom's lake cottage. Martin had met with all three of them. Mom had refused. In my head, I began building a version of events in which Martin had drafted the paperwork Dad wanted, recognized Mom was vulnerable, and simply backed away when she became difficult enough to make the transaction risky. It was neat. It was also based almost entirely on my imagination. 3 business days later, the personal representative called me. I received Hale's response. I sat straighter at my desk. And before I tell you anything, I want you to remember what we discussed, that the records have to speak for themselves. Exactly. She explained that Martin had produced the portion of his file relevant to the estate inquiry. He had not handed me his entire client file, and I didn't get to browse every note simply because Elaine was my mother. The personal representative had reviewed what was relevant and could explain the facts that affected estate property. Was Mom his client? I asked. Yes. Not Dad? Elaine. That immediately changed the picture. The personal representative continued. On April 17th, your mother met with Mr. Hale regarding a proposed change involving the cottage. What kind of change? A restructuring that would have expanded your father's control and potentially created an ownership interest benefiting him, with a path for Amber to benefit as well. I stared at the blank wall across from my desk. Did Mom understand that? Yes. How do you know? Hale documented the meeting. He asked Elaine questions directly. She answered directly. His note states she understood the proposal and declined to proceed. Declined how? She said she did not want to change ownership or control of the cottage. There was a difference between hearing Amber admit Mom said no and hearing that a professional outsider had recorded the refusal at the time. Amber could soften things now. Dad could claim memories had blurred. Mom's own notes could be dismissed as private impressions. Martin Hale had no reason to care which Dawson ended up with a lake cottage. And he had written down Mom's no while she was still alive. What did Martin do? I asked. He did not proceed. That answer embarrassed me a little. For 3 days, I had mentally cast this man as the outside professional who helped Dad corner a sick woman. In reality, the outsider had done the simplest thing everyone inside our family should have done. Elaine said no. He stopped. The personal representative let the silence sit for a moment before adding, "There's something else." I picked up my pen. Thomas contacted Hale again. When? 4 days later. Mom too? No. My hand stopped. Dad went back alone? He did. What did he ask? He wanted to know whether authority he already had for certain financial matters could be used to accomplish substantially the same objective without Elaine executing the proposed change. I had to read my own notes twice after I wrote the sentence. Dad had gone home after Mom said no, waited 4 days, then returned without her to ask whether there was another way. What did Martin tell him? That he would not assist with changing ownership or control of Elaine's property without Elaine's authorization, so he refused Dad too. Yes. Did Dad argue? The note says Thomas was frustrated and stated that he was trying to simplify matters because of Elaine's health. Hale reiterated that Elaine had understood the proposal and declined it. I closed my eyes. There was something uniquely ugly about the phrase "because of Elaine's health." It was the same language Dad had used with me all year. Mom was tired. Mom needed less stress. Mom couldn't deal with complications. Everything sounded protective, until you put it beside the fact that Mom had already answered. No. Does Hale's file say he thought Mom was incompetent? No. Confused? No. Unable to understand? No, quite the opposite. The personal representative paused. Meredith, this is meaningful evidence of your mother's intent regarding the cottage. It still does not tell us what Thomas did elsewhere. I know. And it does not prove he misused money. I know. This time I didn't resent the warning. I asked for the dates again, then opened Mom's April calendar. April 17th. MH11. Not PT said no. April 21st, 4 days later, had a smaller note near the bottom of the square. Tom still asking. I hadn't noticed it the first time because Mom had also written grocery items beside it. Milk, bananas, batteries. That was Mom all over. Somewhere between batteries and bananas, she had recorded that her husband would not accept her answer. I sent a photo of the calendar entry to the personal representative. She replied 20 minutes later. Dates match Hale's notes. That was the first moment I stopped wondering whether April 17th might turn out to be a dramatic misunderstanding. It wasn't. But the cottage still wasn't the part that scared me most. The copied financial statement Mom had saved showed one transfer several days after Dad's second visit to Martin. It came from an account held individually by Mom. The amount was substantial enough to notice, but not so enormous that anyone would immediately call the police. $18,400. Mom had circled it. Beside the amount, she had written one question mark. That was all. When I first saw it, I had almost dismissed it. Dad had legitimate access to handle certain bills, while Mom's mobility declined. $18,400 could have paid for medical equipment, insurance premiums, repairs, property taxes, or any number of ordinary things I knew nothing about. Now the timing bothered me. I called the personal representative back. There's a transfer on the statement Mom saved. April 24th. $18,400. I see it. Can you tell where it went? Not from this page. Can I call the bank? No. The answer came quickly enough to make me smile despite myself. I thought you were going to say that. I'm glad you're learning. I don't enjoy it. You don't have to. She told me she would request the relevant account history through the estate administration. Because Mom had died and the estate was already open, obtaining records was her responsibility as personal representative, not mine as an angry daughter, armed with screenshots and suspicions. Until then, she said, do not characterize the transfer. So I can't call it unauthorized. Correct. Can I call it suspicious? In your own notes, if that helps you remember to examine it. I leaned back. What can I do? Find facts only you can find. That answer mattered. For the first time, I realized my role wasn't to become a substitute lawyer, banker, or investigator. I didn't need to break into accounts or outsmart professionals. I needed to identify the human information that documents couldn't explain. I knew exactly who might have it. Amber answered on the fourth ring. What? It was the warmest greeting I had gotten from my sister that week. I have one question. That sounds ominous. Did Dad lose money before April? Silence. I had deliberately asked nothing about Mom's account. Nothing about the transfer. Nothing about Martin's file. I wanted to know what Amber would tell me before she knew what I had learned. Why are you asking? Because I'm asking. Meredith, I'm not doing another interrogation. Then say you don't know. Another silence. Finally, she said, he had a bad investment. My pulse changed. When? Before Mom got really sick. How bad? He said it was manageable. How much? I don't know. Did Mom know? I thought she did. That isn't what I asked. Amber sighed loudly. I don't know what Mom knew. When did Dad tell you? Last spring, before April 17th? Yes. I wrote it down. What did he tell you happened? That something he put money into went wrong? He said he could fix it. With what? I don't know. You keep saying that, because I don't know everything you apparently think I know. Her defensiveness sounded different now. Earlier, when we talked about the cottage, Amber had been protecting a decision. This time I heard something else underneath it, fear that every answer might lead to the next question. Did he ask you for money? No. Did he give you money? The silence that followed was longer. I sat up. Amber? Dad has helped me before. That wasn't my question. We're family. Parents help their kids. Did he give you money after April? Her voice sharpened. What exactly did Mom leave you? I let the question hang. There it was again. Every time Amber felt cornered, she wanted to know how much I knew. I asked you something simple. And I asked you something simple. I'm not discussing Mom's second letter with you. The second I said it, I regretted the phrasing. Amber went completely quiet. I had just confirmed there was another letter. Not what it said. Not when I got it. But enough. That was careless. Second letter? She asked. I corrected too late. That's not what we're talking about. You said second letter. I know what I said. June gave you something else? I stood and began pacing my office, angry with myself. Amber, answer the question. No, you answer mine. I could almost hear Mom telling me I had moved too fast, and I hated that she could still be right from the grave. So I stopped. No more questions today. What did Mom say about me? I'm hanging up. Meredith. I ended the call. It wasn't the strategic disaster I would make later, but it was a warning. I had learned enough to make Amber nervous, and then, because I wanted one more answer, I had given her information for free. I wrote it on my notes exactly as it happened. Mistake. Confirmed existence of another letter. I wasn't interested in making myself look smarter in retrospect than I had been. That evening, Dad called. I let it go to voicemail. He called again, 20 minutes later. Then a text appeared. Amber says you're asking questions about my finances. Call me. I didn't. A second text came. Whatever your mother wrote. She didn't understand everything that was going on. I stared at those words. 3 days earlier, Dad had wanted Mom's envelope without knowing what was inside. Now, after Amber learned there was another letter, Mom apparently hadn't understood everything. He still didn't know what she had written. That mattered. I took a screenshot, then preserved the original text thread rather than treating the screenshot as some magical piece of courtroom evidence. I sent nothing back. Dad called one final time. His voicemail was calmer. Meredith, I don't know what Amber told you, but your mother's health was complicated. I was the one managing things every day. You weren't here for all of it. Don't take bits of paperwork and build a story you don't understand. Call me. It was almost persuasive. That was what made Dad dangerous. He rarely shouted. He didn't need to. He could take a choice someone else made, wrap it in practicality, and make you feel childish for objecting. Mom had been sick. Dad had been there. I had not been there every day. All 3 statements were true. None of them answered why he had gone back to Martin without Mom after she said no. The next morning, I drove to the cottage. I hadn't been there since before Mom died. January had turned the lake into a sheet of dull gray beneath a low Michigan sky. Snow covered the narrow steps from the porch toward the water, and the dock had been pulled in for winter months earlier. Mom loved that place because it had belonged to her parents before her. She used to say it was the only property she owned that still felt like memory instead of money. Dad always called it our lake place. I had never paid attention to the pronoun. Inside, the heat had been left low, but running because the estate was maintaining the property. I walked through the small living room, past the plaid couch Mom refused to replace, and stopped beside the window facing the frozen shoreline. I tried to understand Dad's fear without excusing what he had done. If he had lost a meaningful amount of retirement money, the cottage would have looked like trapped liquidity. A property sitting unused for much of the winter. Something valuable that his wife owned separately. Sell it, restructure it, gain control of it, and suddenly a private failure could disappear. That was motive, not proof. I kept having to remind myself of the difference. Mom's no told me Dad wanted something she didn't want to give him. The transfer told me money moved soon afterward. Amber's admission told me Dad had suffered an investment loss before the meeting. Those facts could belong to the same story. They could also belong to different ones. I left the cottage without touching a drawer. That decision mattered because the easiest thing would have been to start searching Mom's belongings for secret documents. But the property was under estate administration. I wasn't going to accuse Dad of treating Mom's property as his own, while helping myself to whatever I wanted because I believed my motives were better. 6 days after the personal representative requested the records, she called me again. Her voice was different this time. "I have the account history." I sat down. And the April 24th transfer was $18,400 from Elaine's individual account into an account Thomas controlled. My throat tightened. Could he legally move it? That's not a yes or no question based on the record alone. He had legitimate authority to handle certain expenses. We still have to determine purpose and authorization. Where did the money go after that? There were several transactions. Some appear consistent with normal household expenses. I waited. What about the rest? Within 12 days, $7,500 moved from Thomas's account to Amber. I didn't say anything. The number sat between us. $7,500. Not the entire transfer. Not a suitcase of cash. Not enough to prove my sister had conspired to steal a cottage. Enough to require an explanation. Do we know what it was for? No. Does the bank record say? Personnel transfer. Could it have been Dad's own money? Yes. That answer irritated me even though I knew it was correct. She continued. Money is fungible. You cannot simply draw a straight line from Elaine's account to Amber and declare the same dollars traveled intact. What we can say is that Elaine's funds entered an account controlled by Thomas, and less than 2 weeks later, Thomas transferred $7,500 to Amber. We need context. When did Amber know where Dad's money came from? That's not something bank records can tell us. Find facts only you can find. The phrase came back. I thought about Amber's silence when I asked whether Dad had given her money after April. She had not said no. She had said parents help their kids. Is there anything else in the records? Yes. I heard paper shifting on the other end. Thomas's account balance before Elaine's transfer was significantly lower than it had been earlier that year. There are also transactions consistent with investment losses several months before April. My father's bad investment had stopped being a vague confession to Amber. It had begun leaving a paper trail. How bad? We're still reviewing it. I'm not giving you a total until I know what belongs in the calculation. Fair. Meredith, I need you to be careful now. I know. No, I mean specifically. You know enough to ask informed questions, but not enough to make final accusations. If Amber received money without knowing it originated from Elaine's funds, that is a different issue from knowingly participating in misuse. I looked toward the notebook where I had written every date. April 17th. Mom refused. April 21st. Dad returned a loan to Martin. April 24th. $18,400 left Mom's individual account. Within 12 days, $7,500 went from Dad to Amber. The timeline was getting tighter. What do I need to know next? I asked. The personal representative answered with the question I had already been afraid to ask. Not whether Amber received the money. We know she did. I picked up my pen. We need to know when she understood where it came from. The next call from the personal representative answered one question and created a worse one. The first bank history had shown the $7,500 Dad transferred to Amber less than 2 weeks after $18,400 left Mom's individual account. That was enough to make me suspicious, but not enough to say the money Mom transferred had become Amber's money. The deeper accounting took another several days, because the representative had to separate ordinary household spending from transfers that had no obvious connection to Mom's care, the cottage, taxes, insurance, or medical expenses. When she finally called me again, she told me the $7,500 had only been the first payment. Over the following weeks, Dad had sent Amber several additional amounts that brought the total to just under $18,000. That doesn't mean $18,000 traveled directly from Elaine to Amber, she reminded me. Thomas had other funds moving through the same account. I understand. What we can establish is timing. Elaine's money entered an account Thomas controlled. His balance had already been depleted by investment losses. Then, over a relatively short period, he sent Amber approximately $18,000 in what the transfers appear to characterize as family help. Do we know what Amber thought the money was? Not from banking records. Do we know whether Mom approved it? We have not found documentation showing Elaine authorized Thomas to use her funds for gifts to Amber. That wording was careful, and I was beginning to appreciate careful wording more than dramatic certainty. It meant we had a problem. It did not mean we had finished proving exactly what the problem was. The representative told me Thomas had legitimate authority to pay certain household expenses from one of Mom's accounts while she was alive. The arrangement made practical sense when Mom stopped driving. Dad paid utilities, insurance, property expenses, and some medical bills because physically getting to a bank or sitting at a computer for long periods had become harder for her. The existence of that authority was not suspicious by itself. What mattered was whether he had used it beyond what Mom had allowed. So the next question is still Amber, I said. Yes, receiving money from your father is not proof that she knew he was misusing access to Elaine's funds, but if she learned later, then the timeline changes. I wrote that down. The timeline changes. That afternoon, I texted Amber and asked to meet. I expected an argument. Instead, she replied 15 minutes later with the name of a coffee shop between our houses and a time the following morning. When I arrived, she was already there. She had chosen a table against the wall, away from the counter, and the families clustered near the windows. She looked exhausted. Her wedding had been less than 3 weeks earlier, but there was nothing newlywed about the way she sat with both hands wrapped around a paper cup, watching the entrance as if she expected someone unpleasant. Is Nathan here? I asked. No. Does he know you're meeting me? That's none of your business. Fine. I sat across from her and put my notebook on the table. Amber stared at it. Seriously? I remember things better when I write them down. You remember everything. No, I remember the things I think matter. That's different. She gave me a tired look. What do you want? I want to understand when you knew Dad's story about me wasn't true. Her expression closed immediately. That's what this is about? It's one of the things this is about. I already told you Dad said you'd take over everything. Yes. I want to know why you believed him. Amber looked through the window for a moment before answering. Because it sounded like you. I almost laughed. What does that mean? It means Mom always called you whenever something needed to be read. A contract, an insurance letter, some stupid notice from the county. You were the one who got to sit there with a pen and explain what everything meant. Mom could read. I know she could read. Then why are you describing it like I was translating for a child? Amber's fingers tightened around the cup. Because you know exactly what I mean. Mom trusted your judgment. There was something old in the way she said it. Older than Mom's illness. Older than the cottage. I waited. Amber looked down. Dad knew that bothered me. That was the first completely honest thing she had said about her motive. What did he tell you? She hesitated, then began reluctantly. What follows is not a scene I witnessed. It is how Amber described the conversation to me that morning, and later details she repeated when the family stopped pretending there had been no plan at all. She said Dad first approached her in March, before the April meeting with Martin Hale. Mom's mobility had worsened, and Amber had started doing more driving because she lived closer. Dad told her he was worried that if Mom became weaker, I would come in and start making decisions for everyone. He reminded Amber that I had questioned insurance paperwork before, that I had once convinced Mom not to sign a contractor agreement until it was revised, and that Mom frequently asked me to read financial notices. Dad had taken facts and built a threat out of them. He told Amber, Meredith has her own life until there's a decision to make. Then suddenly she knows what's best for everybody. Amber had believed him because part of her already wanted to. He said you would sell the cottage, she told me. I stared at her. Why would I sell Mom's cottage? He said you thought it was expensive to maintain. I did think that. Exactly. I also think Dad's truck uses too much gas. That doesn't mean I'm plotting to sell his truck. Amber rolled her eyes. You're doing it again. Doing what? Making everything sound stupid after the fact. No. I'm asking you what Mom told you. She went quiet. I leaned forward slightly. Did Mom ever tell you I wanted her cottage? No. Did Mom ever tell you she planned to give me control of it? No. Did she ever say you were getting nothing? Amber's jaw tightened. No. So, where did that entire story come from? She looked away. Dad, I said. She didn't answer, which was answer enough. For a few seconds, I watched people move through the coffee shop behind her. A man carried 2 drinks toward a woman with a stroller. Someone laughed near the counter. Outside, a snowplow pushed gray slush toward the curb. Everything around us looked ordinary, which made the conversation feel stranger. What was Dad afraid of? I asked. Amber gave a humorless laugh. You know he lost money. I know he had investment losses. I don't know what he told you. He said it was a temporary problem, something he could recover from if he had time. How much? He never gave me an exact number. Did he tell you Mom knew? At first he acted like she did. At first? Amber took a sip of coffee even though it had to be cold by then. Later he said he didn't want to upset her with details. I wrote the sentence down. Amber saw me and shook her head. You make everything sound worse when you put it in that notebook. No. The words were already bad. He was scared, Meredith. So was Mom. I know. Do you? Her eyes snapped up. That was where I nearly lost the conversation. I could feel anger pushing me toward the moral verdict before I had the timeline. So I backed off. When Dad first gave you money, what did he say it was? Amber did not answer immediately. Family help, she finally said. For what? Wedding deposits. Some credit cards. Things Nathan and I were trying to get ahead of before we got married. How much did you think Dad gave you? I didn't add it all up at first. I did. She flinched. About 18,000. I know that now. What did you think the source was? Dad. His pension? His savings. I don't know. His money. I believed that part was possible. Dad had never been poor. An $18,000 gift over several months would have been generous, but not so absurd that Amber had to assume he robbed a bank to provide it. So receiving the first money didn't tell you anything was wrong, I said. No. When did that change? She looked at me for a long time. July. The month sat between us, like another piece dropping into place. What happened in July? Amber began rubbing her thumb along the seam of the coffee cup. Mom and I had an argument. About the cottage? Yes. Tell me. She was angry that Dad kept talking about it. I told her he was trying to make sure it stayed in the family. It already was in the family. I know that now. You knew it then. Amber ignored that. She said neither of us had any right to decide what happened to it before she died. I told her Dad was afraid you'd take over everything. And? She got really angry. What did she say? Amber looked embarrassed. She said, Where did you get that idea? I waited. I told her Dad. And then? She said the cottage was never supposed to be yours alone. My throat tightened. What exactly did she say? She said her will divided it between both of us. There it was. Not a secret inheritance reveal. Not Mom choosing me over Amber. The opposite. Dad had recruited Amber using the fear that I would take something Mom had already planned to divide equally. What did you do after Mom told you that? Amber stared at the table. You confronted Dad? Yes. What did he say? He said wills can change. I felt my mouth go dry. That was his answer? He said Mom could get influenced. He said you would start putting ideas in her head. Mom had already signed the will in 2022. I didn't know when she signed it. Did you believe Dad after that? Amber's silence lasted too long. No, I said quietly. You didn't. She looked up sharply. You knew by July that Mom had never planned to hand me the cottage. You knew Dad's story about me taking everything was false. I knew that part was wrong. That part was the reason you gave me for helping him. It wasn't that simple. Then make it complicated. She pushed the cup away. By then, I had already spent months helping with everything. I was the one driving Mom. I was the one rearranging my schedule. Dad called me every time something went wrong. Relatives called me for updates. And every time Mom wanted an opinion about paperwork, she still asked whether you had looked at it. The resentment in her voice was so naked that for a moment she seemed younger than 32. I was there, she continued. You got to come in, ask 6 questions, look smart, and go back to your life. That isn't why Mom trusted me. You don't get to tell me how it felt. She was right about that. So I didn't. Instead, I asked, when did you learn the money wasn't really Dad's? Her eyes dropped again. Same summer. How? He told me. Why? Because I asked. What made you ask? Amber exhaled. He sent me another payment. I told him I didn't need that much help. He said not to worry because he was moving money around temporarily. What money? He said some of it had come from Mom's account. I kept my voice flat. Did he say Mom approved giving it to you? He said he had authority to manage the account. That isn't the same question. I know. Did you ask whether Mom approved? Amber didn't answer. That's a no. He said it was family money. I actually had to look away. There was Dad's phrase again. Family money. A phrase flexible enough to erase whoever actually owned it. What did you do with the money after you learned that? I'd already spent some. That's not what I asked. I know. Did you return what you still had? No. Did you tell Mom? No. Did you tell me? No. Did you stop helping Dad keep me away from financial conversations? Amber's face hardened. You make it sound like I was standing at the door with a gun. I'm not talking about a gun. I'm talking about telling me Mom was too tired when what you really meant was Dad didn't want me asking questions. Sometimes she was tired. I know. That's why the lies worked. Amber looked as if I had slapped her. I didn't enjoy it. But I wasn't going to soften the distinction for her. You were lied to in March, I said. I believe that. Dad used something you were already insecure about. And he made me sound like a threat. But by July, Mom told you directly that the cottage was meant for both of us. Then Dad admitted some of the money he was giving you came from Mom's account. Amber's eyes became wet, but she didn't cry. I finished the sentence anyway. Dad lied to you. Then you learned the truth and kept lying to me. She sat back. You think that makes everything simple? No, I think it makes one thing simple. What? The point where you had a choice. Her mouth tightened. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Amber said, What would you have done? That isn't relevant. Of course it is. No. You want me to tell you I would have been perfect so you can argue that nobody could meet that standard. I'm not doing that. She looked away again. I continued more quietly. Maybe I would have panicked. Maybe I would have been angry. Maybe I would have wanted the money. But once Mom told me Dad's story was false, I would have stopped telling that story. Amber laughed without humor. You always think you know what you'd do. No, I know what I'm doing now. That silenced her. I asked why she had continued. The answer came in pieces. Dad told her she had already done more for the family than I ever would. He told her I had money, independence, and a career, while she was the one sacrificing time. He said that when Mom was gone, I would suddenly show up with documents and opinions and make Amber feel like a guest in her own family. He promised that wouldn't happen. What did he promise exactly? I asked. That I wouldn't lose everything to you. Everything meaning what? The cottage. Whatever Mom left, I don't know. You do know. She looked irritated. He never gave me percentages, Meredith. But he made you believe helping him now would protect you later. Yes. There was another motive too, and Amber resisted admitting it longer. She had spent months telling relatives I was difficult, that I questioned everything, that Mom became anxious when I raised financial issues. Every lie made the next one easier, because reversing herself would mean admitting the earlier version had been false. If I suddenly called everyone and said you weren't trying to take the cottage, she said, what was I supposed to say? That Dad made it up and I repeated it? Yes. She shook her head. That would have destroyed him. No, it would have embarrassed him. You don't understand what he was like then. I'm starting to. And Mom depended on him. So protecting Dad's reputation mattered more than correcting a lie about me? That's not what I said. It's what happened. Amber rubbed both hands over her face. Then she said something I had not expected. I also thought I deserved something. I waited. There, happy? No. She lowered her hands. Everyone needed me. Dad needed me. Mom needed rides. People called me. I was the one rearranging things. And yes, after a while I thought, if I'm doing all of this, why should you get the same thing I get? That was not flattering. It was also the most honest motive she had given me. You thought access meant ownership, I said. I didn't say ownership. You thought being the person everyone relied on entitled you to more of Mom's decisions. She stared at me. I thought I mattered for once. That line explained Amber better than greed ever could. It did not excuse her. I closed my notebook. She looked surprised. That's it? For today? You're not going to ask what Dad said every single time he called me? No. Why not? Because right now I know where your choice changed. That's what I needed. Amber leaned back and studied me suspiciously. You think Dad is going to admit any of this? I don't know. He won't. That sounds certain. It is. How can you be so sure? Her mouth twisted. Because Dad changes his story every time the old version becomes inconvenient. I looked at her. Amber seemed to realize she had said more than she intended. What do you mean? Nothing. No, you just said he changes his story. He does. And you kept trusting him? I stopped trusting what he said out loud. There was a tiny pause. What does that mean? Amber hesitated, then picked up her phone from the table. It means after a while when he promised something, I made sure he texted it. Or I kept the texts if he already had, because later he'd say he never said it that way. I felt something shift in my attention. You saved his messages? She immediately became defensive. Don't get excited. I'm not excited. You look excited. I'm interested. Well, don't be. Most of them are family stuff. Scheduling. Mom. The cottage. Nothing dramatic. Did you save them because you thought he was doing something wrong? No, I saved them because I was tired of him acting like I misunderstood him. I could have asked for the phone right then. I almost did. Instead, I remembered how badly I had handled the second letter slip. If Amber had texts, pressing her before I understood what they contained might only make her delete them, hide them, or stop talking to me altogether. So I nodded. Okay. She narrowed her eyes. That's it? That's it. Amber looked suspiciously disappointed. We left the coffee shop 10 minutes later. I walked to my car with one fact I had not written down in front of her. Somewhere on my sister's phone was a record she had created not to expose Dad, but to protect herself from him. I did not know yet whether those messages proved anything. I only knew they existed. Before I reached my car door, Amber called my name. I turned. She was standing beside her SUV with one hand on the handle. You think Mom warned you about Dad because she knew everything, she said. I don't think Mom knew everything. She knew enough. So did you. Amber's face tightened, but she didn't argue. Then she looked back toward the coffee shop and said, You think Dad's going to admit any of this? If this turns ugly, he'll say I did everything. The sentence hit me with the force of recognition. Mom's second letter had warned me before I had uncovered a single transfer. Your father will tell you this was Amber's idea. Check before you believe him. I stood in the parking lot watching my sister drive away, and for the first time I understood that Mom had not only been afraid Dad would deny what he had done, she had been afraid he had already decided who would take the blame. By the time I agreed to meet Dad, I had already spent days telling myself not to do exactly that. Mom had warned me. The personal representative had warned me. Even June, without using the word, had warned me. I had enough facts to know something was wrong, but the estate review was still incomplete. There were still account records being matched against bills, property expenses, medical costs, and transfers. I knew all of that intellectually. Emotionally, I had just sat across from Amber and heard her admit that Dad had frightened her with a story about me taking Mom's cottage, then continued accepting money and helping keep me outside important conversations after she learned the story was false. By the end of that day, patience no longer felt like discipline. It felt like letting Dad sit comfortably while everyone else cleaned up the consequences of his decisions. He suggested we meet at the house. I refused. I wasn't ready to sit in Mom's kitchen while Dad explained why Mom had misunderstood what happened to her own property. We met instead at a small diner outside Grand Rapids, where Dad sometimes had breakfast after church. It was mid-morning on a Thursday, late enough that the breakfast crowd had thinned, and early enough that neither of us could claim we had another commitment pressing against the conversation. Dad was already in a booth when I arrived. He had coffee in front of him, and the expression he wore whenever he believed someone had created an unnecessary problem he would now have to solve. "You look tired," he said as I sat down. "So do you." He gave me a thin smile. "Your sister says you've been questioning her about money. Amber says a lot of things. And apparently you've been talking to people who handled your mother's affairs." I should have heard the fishing in that sentence. Instead, I heard accusation. "I talked to the personal representative. That's what she's there for." Dad leaned back. "Probate is already being handled." "Yes. So why are you turning it into an investigation?" I had spent several days trying not to let anyone define what I was doing before the evidence did. Dad managed it in the first minute. "I have questions about April 17th. His face barely changed. That was one of Dad's strengths. Amber reacted with her whole body. Dad could hear a date that had apparently bothered Mom enough to preserve in writing and still reach calmly for his coffee. "What about it?" "You took Mom to meet Martin Hale." "Yes. Amber told me Mom had physical therapy." "I didn't tell you that." "There it was." "Not I didn't know she told you." "Not that was wrong. Just enough distance to make the lie belong to someone else." "You knew Amber was keeping me away from that meeting." "I knew you weren't part of it." "Why?" "Because it concerned your mother and me." "The cottage concerned Mom. It concerned our marriage." "Dad, it belonged to her." He set his cup down more sharply than he intended. "Your mother and I were married almost 40 years. You keep saying hers like I was some tenant living in her house. That isn't what I said. It's how you're treating it." I watched him for a moment. Thomas had always been better at arguing about the emotional meaning of a fact than the fact itself. Ask why he went back to Martin alone after Mom refused. And suddenly we were debating whether 40 years of marriage counted for anything. So I asked again, "What did Mom say at the meeting?" "She didn't want to change anything at the time." "At the time?" "She was overwhelmed." "Did she say no?" Dad's eyes narrowed slightly. "People can say no because they don't understand why something is necessary." My stomach tightened. She understood. "You weren't there." "No, Martin was." That was the first mistake. Small enough that I didn't recognize it immediately. Dad's eyes changed. Not dramatically. He just became more attentive. "What did Martin tell you?" I should have stopped. Instead, anger took the wheel. He documented the meeting. Mom understood the proposal. She refused it. Then you went back 4 days later without her and asked whether you could accomplish the same thing using the authority you already had. Dad's face hardened. "Martin discussed my wife's private legal affairs with you?" The estate representative obtained relevant records. He looked away toward the window. I could almost see him reorganizing the board in his head. Until that moment, Dad knew I had Mom's letters. He knew June had followed written instructions. He probably suspected Mom had left notes. Now he knew Martin's file had been pulled into the estate review. I kept going anyway. "What did you think Mom's no meant?" Dad's voice lowered. "I was trying to protect our finances." "From Mom?" "From a situation you didn't understand." "Then explain it." He rubbed one hand over his jaw. "Your mother's medical situation cost money. The house cost money. The cottage cost money. I was handling bills, maintenance, insurance, everything that had to keep moving while Elaine was in pain and exhausted. And your investment losses?" His hand stopped. Amber had told me the truth about that much. Dad looked at me with an expression that was more wounded than angry. "She told you. She told me you lost money before April. I made an investment that didn't work out. How much? That's my business. It becomes relevant when money leaves Mom's individual account 3 days after Martin refuses to help you change control of her property. That was the second mistake. Bigger." Dad's face lost every trace of wounded dignity. "What money?" I should have heard myself answering the wrong question. "The $18,400 transferred April 24th. His eyes stayed on mine. "And some of it moved through an account you controlled while you were already dealing with investment losses." Dad sought back. "You think you discovered something criminal." "I didn't say criminal. You're implying I stole from your mother. I'm asking whether she authorized that transfer." "I had authority to manage bills." "That's not the same as permission to use her money however you wanted." "Do you know what her bills were?" "The estate is reviewing them." "Do you know what medical equipment cost?" Property tax, insurance, repairs. Do you know what I paid out of my own account before I reimbursed myself? No. That's why records are being reviewed. Exactly. Dad pointed one finger toward me. You don't know. For a few seconds, I let him have the ground. He was right about that specific thing. I didn't know how every dollar had been used. The representative had told me repeatedly not to turn suspicious timing into a conclusion before the records were matched. Dad saw my silence and pressed. And now you're dragging Amber into it because I helped my daughter with her wedding. I know you sent her money. She was getting married. I know. What kind of father would I be if I had the ability to help and refused? The kind who didn't use someone else's money to do it. His jaw tightened. You still haven't proven that. No. The waitress appeared beside the booth and asked whether we wanted anything else. Dad told her no. I ordered another coffee I didn't want because I needed the interruption more than the caffeine. When she left, Dad folded his hands on the table. Meredith, your mother was very sick. She had trouble walking. She was in pain. Yes. She got tired. She got overwhelmed. There were days she didn't want to deal with anything. Yes. And you weren't there for most of that. The words found the place he intended them to find. I looked at him. Dad continued more gently now, because he knew gentleness made guilt travel farther. Amber was there. I was there. We were the ones getting her out of bed on hard mornings, driving her, keeping track of medication, dealing with insurance calls. You came when you could, and I'm not blaming you for having a life. But don't come in afterward with a folder and act like you understand what every decision looked like. For several seconds, I felt 16 again. Not because Dad was shouting. Because he had taken the one part of the story I already questioned in myself and put it at the center of the table. I had backed away. Not completely. Not forever. But I had accepted too many versions of Mom is tired and come another day. Because I respected boundaries and because, if I was honest, being rejected repeatedly offended my pride. Dad knew that. Amber knew it too. You weren't here. It was the perfect defense because there was enough truth in it to make me want to defend my entire relationship with Mom instead of staying on the question. I almost did. I almost started listing visits, phone calls, lunches, appointments, weekends. I almost turned Mom's last year into a scorecard, proving I had been a good daughter. Then I heard her letter in my head. Find out what I said yes to. Find out what I said no to. I put both hands flat on the table. My visits don't change whether Mom said no. Dad stared at me. You can think I should have come more. I continued. Maybe you're right. Maybe I should have checked more often instead of accepting what you and Amber told me. I'll live with my part of that. But none of it changes April 17th. His expression became colder. You want this to be simple? No. I want you to answer a simple question. I did what I believed was best for my wife. She told you it wasn't. You have a handwritten note and one attorney's interpretation of a meeting. And June's folder. The second the name left my mouth, I knew. Dad did too. June has a folder? I stopped speaking. Too late. His eyes sharpened. What did Elaine give her? I picked up my purse. Dad leaned forward. Meredith, we're done. You brought me here and accused me of stealing from my wife, and now we're done because I asked a question. I didn't accuse you of stealing. You didn't have to use the word. I stood. Dad's voice followed me. Your mother trusted me for almost 40 years. I turned back. Then why did she move her papers out of the house? That was the third mistake. The worst one. Until then, Dad knew June had instructions and, thanks to my loose mouth, a folder. Now he knew Mom had deliberately removed information from his reach. His face went completely still. I left before I could give him anything else. The adrenaline carried me all the way to my car. It took another 5 minutes before anger drained enough for me to understand what I had done. I had told Dad Martin's records existed. I had told him the estate was examining the April transfer. I had told him June had a folder. And I had told him Mom deliberately moved information outside the house. I had been right about the danger and wrong about the timing. By the next afternoon, Dad had started using what he understood best. Not bank accounts. People. My Aunt Diane called first. I hadn't spoken to her since the wedding. Meredith, your father says you're challenging your mother's estate. I'm not. He said you're questioning transactions because you think Amber got more. I'm not contesting Mom's will. There was a pause. Well, that isn't how he described it. Then Dad described it incorrectly. Sweetheart, I know you and Amber have always had your differences, but this is going to tear the family apart. That phrase had apparently become available in bulk. Mom's estate is being administered by an independent personal representative, I said. She's reviewing records because information Mom preserved raised questions. That's all I'm discussing. You don't think you should handle this privately? It is being handled privately. Your father says you contacted lawyers behind his back. Mom met Martin Hale while she was alive. The estate representative contacted him. Aunt Diane sighed as if accuracy were exhausting. I just don't want grief making everyone suspicious. Neither do I. I ended the call before it turned into an argument. 2 hours later, a cousin texted. I heard you're trying to take the lake house from Amber. Is that true? I replied once. No. Mom's valid estate plan includes both of us. The estate representative is reviewing transactions involving Mom's property. I am not contesting Amber's legitimate inheritance. I did not send the letter. I did not send bank screenshots. I did not explain April 17th to a cousin who had not called Mom once in her final month. That evening, another relative called. Then I stopped answering. Dad's counterattack worked because it used ambiguity. Probate was still open. Most relatives didn't know exactly what Mom owned, how the cottage was titled, what her will said, or what the personal representative was reviewing. Dad didn't need to invent a complicated lie. He only had to say Meredith is asking questions about money after her mother died and let people finish the story themselves. By the next morning, I understood something uncomfortable. Dad did not need to defeat the evidence if he could discredit the person asking for it. June called just before noon. Amber came by. I stood up so quickly my chair rolled backward. When? This morning. What did she do? Knocked on my door like a civilized human being, if that's what you're asking. I closed my eyes. Sorry. She asked what Elaine left with me. What did you tell her? What I told Thomas. I followed Elaine's instructions. Did she ask about the April folder? There was a pause. Yes. My stomach sank. Of course Dad had told her. What exactly did she say? June answered carefully. She said you told Thomas I had some of Elaine's papers. She wanted to know whether there were more. And? I said I would not discuss anything Elaine did not authorize me to discuss. I leaned against my desk. Did Amber threaten you? No. Get angry? Not exactly. What did she do? June hesitated. She cried. I was not prepared for that. She said Mom would hate what was happening. She said you and Thomas were turning grief into a war and that I was helping by keeping secrets. Did that work? No. I almost laughed from relief. June, I loved your mother. Loving her does not obligate me to ignore what she asked me to do because one of her daughters feels guilty. I sat down. Did Amber try to take anything? No, she never came inside. Did she ask whether you had originals? She tried. What did you say? Meredith, I am 63 years old. I managed a middle school office for 27 years. Your sister is not the first emotional person who has stood in front of me hoping persistence would become permission. That was the first time I laughed in days. After the call, I contacted the personal representative and told her exactly what had happened at the diner, including everything I had revealed. She was silent long enough to make me feel 17. Finally, she said, that was not ideal. I know. You gave Thomas a fairly accurate inventory of the directions we're looking. I know. The good news is, official bank records don't disappear because someone knows we requested them. Hale's contemporaneous file already exists. Elaine's materials are outside Thomas's possession. I know. You keep saying you know. I'm hoping repetition will make me feel less stupid. It won't. Fair. Then she gave me useful instructions. Preserve what I had. Stop moving original documents around. Keep copies separate. Record dates and sources. Do not ask relatives to become investigators. Do not respond to speculation as if every accusation required a trial. Most importantly, stop confronting people for information we could obtain independently. I spent that afternoon reorganizing everything. On one side of a legal pad, I wrote fact. On the other, assumption. Under fact, Mom owned the cottage separately. Dad had investment losses before April 17th. Dad arranged the April meeting. Amber told me Mom had physical therapy. Mom refused the proposed change. Dad returned to Martin alone 4 days later. Martin refused to help him bypass Mom's decision. Mom's individual account transferred $18,400 into an account Dad controlled. Dad later sent Amber approximately $18,000 across multiple transfers. Amber knew by July that Mom intended the cottage to benefit both daughters, not me alone. Amber knew by summer that some money Dad was moving came from Mom's account. Under assumption, Dad intended from the beginning to steal the cottage. Every dollar sent to Amber came directly from Mom. Amber knew the source of the first payment. Dad's investment losses were the only reason for the cottage plan. Every canceled visit had been deliberately engineered. Dad had committed a specific crime. Looking at those two columns made the story smaller and stronger at the same time. I didn't need every ugly possibility to be true. The facts were enough to keep going. I photographed the remaining originals at high resolution, confirmed the personal representative had copies, then placed Mom's letters and April materials in a secure document box. The screenshots on my phone were backups, not evidence floating around in my camera roll between grocery receipts and pictures of snow. I exported Dad's text thread without editing it, and stopped answering relatives unless they asked a question I could answer with a fact. For the first time since the wedding, I stopped chasing the family's version of events. I started building a chronology. That was when I saw the notation. It was on Mom's paper calendar, not April but June. June 4th had a normal medical appointment. June 7th had a note about the cottage insurance. June 10th had Amber's initials and a time. Beside it, Mom had written, T promised A. I checked the next month. July 2nd. T promised A again. My heartbeat quickened. I went through August. There it was a third time, this one underlined once. Ask a what T promised. I sat back and stared at the page. Thomas. Amber. Mom had noticed a promise passing between them months before she died. At first I thought it had to be the cottage. Then I remembered Amber at the coffee shop, telling me why she saved Dad's messages. After a while, when he promised something, I made sure he texted it. I had spent weeks trying to find records Dad couldn't reinterpret. Mom had been pointing me toward the one person who might already have them. I called Amber the next morning and asked her one question. What did Dad promise you? She didn't answer right away, so I read the exact words from Mom's calendar. June 10th. T promised A. July 2nd. T promised A again. August. Ask A what T promised. Mom noticed it 3 times. What was he promising you? Amber went silent long enough that I checked the screen to make sure the call hadn't dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat. I'm not doing this over the phone. I told her that was fine and suggested my house that evening. She arrived just after 6 with Nathan beside her. I hadn't asked her to bring him, and judging by the way he stood half a step behind her in my entryway, he hadn't been told much about why they were there. Amber took off her coat without waiting to be invited farther inside. Nathan gave me an awkward nod and said, I'm not here to get involved. I almost told him that marrying Amber had probably made that impossible, but I kept it to myself. Instead, I led them into the kitchen and placed a photocopy of Mom's calendar page on the table. I kept the original locked away. Amber looked at the notation and rubbed one thumb over the edge of her phone. Dad promised I wouldn't be pushed out. I sat across from her. Pushed out of what? She shrugged. The family, Mom's estate, the cottage, everything. Nathan turned toward her. What do you mean, the cottage? Amber ignored him. I asked, was Dad promising you Mom's half? More than half? Control? She became irritated. He didn't hand me a contract, Meredith. Then tell me the words he used. Her gaze shifted to Nathan again, and I realized his presence wasn't accidental. Amber had brought a witness because she was finally afraid of being alone with her own version of events. He said he would make sure I was protected, she said. He said after everything I was doing, I wasn't going to end up with nothing while you came in afterward and took over. I reminded her that by July she already knew Mom's will treated us equally. Amber nodded once, barely. I know. Nathan's head turned slowly toward her. You knew that? She froze. He asked again, quieter. You knew your mom wasn't leaving Meredith everything? Amber looked annoyed rather than surprised, which told me Nathan had heard the opposite story before. Dad lied about that part, she said. We already went over this. Nathan looked at me, then back at her. You and Meredith went over it. You and I didn't. Amber's phone buzzed on the table before she could answer. She glanced at the screen and immediately turned it face down. That movement was so quick that Nathan noticed too. Dad? I asked. Amber didn't answer. I held out my hand. You don't have to show me your phone. Just tell me what he said. She stared at me for a few seconds, then flipped it over and pushed it across the table. The message was from Dad. It had arrived less than a minute earlier. You were the one handling transportation and most of the paperwork. If the estate has questions, you need to explain your decisions. I read it twice. The wording was almost clinical. Not our decisions. Not what we did. Your decisions. Amber watched my face. He's been doing that all week. Doing what? Nathan asked. She took the phone back, changing we into you. Then she showed us another message from 2 days earlier. I trusted you to handle your mother's schedule and keep things organized. I don't know every conversation you had with her. Nathan leaned closer to read it. Didn't he take her to the attorney with you? Amber's jaw tightened. Yes. Didn't he arrange the meeting? Yes. Then why is he writing like you ran all of it? Amber gave him a look that was almost angry enough to stop the conversation. It didn't. Nathan asked the question Mom's letter had been forcing all of us toward for weeks. When did you know he was lying about Meredith? Amber stared at her husband. I could see her trying to decide whether to answer, but she had already answered me at the coffee shop, and lying now would only make the room smaller. July, she said. Nathan's face changed. July? Amber nodded. Mom told me the cottage wasn't going only to Meredith. She said the will divided it. And you kept telling me Meredith was trying to take it? Nathan asked. Amber began explaining immediately. Dad was panicking. Mom was sick. Things were complicated. She had already repeated the story to relatives. She thought I would interfere. Nathan listened until she ran out of ways to turn context into an answer. Then he asked one simple question. If you knew by July that Meredith wasn't trying to take the cottage, why did you keep telling me she was the problem? Amber opened her mouth and closed it again. I didn't rescue her. That wasn't my job. Nathan wasn't asking about a bank transfer or estate law. He was asking whether the woman he married had continued telling him something she knew was false. Finally, Amber said, because by then everything was already a mess. Nathan leaned back and looked away. That isn't an answer. Amber's eyes flashed. You said you didn't want to get involved? I didn't know involved meant finding out I'd been repeating your version of your sister to people for months. The room went quiet until Amber picked up her phone again. She scrolled for several seconds, then stopped. You want to know what Dad promised? She asked me. Here. She put the phone in the middle of the table. The first message she showed me was dated June 10th, the same day Mom had written T promised A, Dad had written, Don't worry about the cottage. After everything you've done, I'll make sure you're protected, Amber had replied. Meredith will fight it, Dad answered. Let me handle Meredith. The cottage stays with us. I read the exchange without touching the phone. There was no sentence saying, Let's take Elaine's cottage. No confession. No legal plan. What mattered was the pattern. Mom owned the cottage. Dad knew she had refused to restructure it. Yet he was already promising Amber that he would determine where it stayed. I asked Amber why she saved the thread. Her answer was almost embarrassingly practical. Because he changes what he says. He'll promise one thing, then months later tell you that you misunderstood him. I started keeping anything important. Nathan looked at her. You were keeping proof against your own father? Amber's mouth tightened. I was keeping proof for myself. She scrolled farther back. A July message read, Elaine is upset right now. She'll calm down. Don't bring Meredith into estate conversations until this is settled. Another said, Your sister doesn't need to know every detail. She'll turn it into a crisis. Then one from later that month. You're the one who has been here. I won't let that count for nothing. Every line fit Dad's method. He rarely issued a direct order when he could create a justification and let someone else carry it out. He fed Amber exactly what she wanted to hear. That her proximity to Mom made her more deserving. That my questions were dangerous. That whatever he did was really protecting the daughter who had stayed. But the messages also trapped Amber, she had replied. Sometimes she agreed. Sometimes she complained about me. In one message, after Dad told her not to involve me, Amber wrote, Fine. I'll tell her Mom needs rest. I looked up at her. She met my eyes for a second, and then looked away. Nathan had read it too. So when you told Meredith your mom was tired, Amber cut him off. Sometimes she was tired. I heard my own voice from weeks earlier. That's why the lies worked. Amber flinched. Nathan stood and walked toward the sink, not leaving, just putting a few feet between himself and the phone. He rested both hands on the counter and stared out into my dark backyard. Amber turned toward me. You wanted proof Dad was behind it. There it is. Proof he was behind part of it? I said, Part of it? The texts show Dad feeding you the story about me. They show him telling you to keep me out of conversations. They show him promising you something involving property Mom had already refused to change. They also show you agreeing. Amber's face hardened. So what? You're going to use them against both of us? I'm going to tell the truth about both of you. Dad manipulated me. Yes. She seemed surprised that I agreed so quickly. Then help me. With what? Make it clear he started this. He used me. I will. Relief appeared on her face too soon. I continued, and I won't pretend you stopped when you learned he lied. Amber stared at me. You really can't give an inch. This isn't an inch. You're asking me to move your responsibility onto Dad because he's trying to move his onto you. Nathan turned back toward us. I kept my eyes on Amber. I'll tell the truth about what he did. I won't lie about what you did. She looked down at her phone. For a moment, she reminded me of Mom sitting at the dining table with a document in front of her, refusing to accept someone else's description of what it meant. The difference was that Amber had spent months benefiting from descriptions she knew were false. Being betrayed by Dad did not erase that. Nathan picked up his coat from the back of the chair. Amber looked at him. Where are you going? Home. We came together. I know. Nathan. He didn't raise his voice. I need to think about how many times I believed something about Meredith because I only heard it from you. He looked at me briefly, not apologizing, not asking me to make him feel better, then left. Amber sat frozen until the front door closed. 3 days later, the independent personal representative held a scheduled estate review meeting. It was not a courtroom, and there was no dramatic audience. We sat around a conference table with documents arranged in folders, exactly the kind of setting where Dad usually looked most comfortable. Amber attended because she and I were beneficiaries under Mom's will. Dad attended because the representative had questions about transactions he made while Mom was alive. I was there because some of the materials being reviewed had come through me in June. The representative asked Dad about the $18,400 April transfer, the later movement of funds, and the extent of his authority while Mom was alive. Dad repeated that he had used Mom's money for legitimate household needs and reimbursements. Some expenses did match bills. Others were still disputed. Then the representative asked about the money that reached Amber. Dad exhaled and looked directly at his younger daughter. Amber handled most of the day-to-day logistics, transportation, scheduling, a lot of the paperwork and conversations with Elaine. I trusted her judgment. Amber's face changed. Dad continued before she could interrupt. I was grieving before Elaine was even gone. I was trying to keep the household functioning. If Amber communicated things poorly or made decisions about who should visit, I wasn't monitoring every conversation. Amber stared at him. You told me to keep Meredith out. Dad's voice became paternal. Amber, you were 32 years old. I didn't control what you said to your sister. You told me she was trying to take the cottage. I told you I was worried about conflict. You promised me the cottage would stay with us. Dad's expression tightened. I don't remember saying it that way. I didn't have to look at Mom's calendar to hear the warning anymore. Thomas was doing exactly what Elaine had predicted. Amber pulled out her phone. Of course you don't. Dad glanced at it and then at me. I said nothing. This was no longer a story I needed to drag into the light by force. Dad had chosen the move that made Amber's private insurance policy more valuable than her loyalty. The personal representative calmly asked both of them to stop arguing and said that if relevant communications existed, they could be provided for review. Dad immediately said, "Private family texts can be taken out of context." Amber laughed once without humor. You were fine with context when it was all my decisions. Dad looked at her sharply. Don't make this worse. I almost smiled at the familiarity of the line. He had said the same thing to me at the wedding when I walked away with Mom's letter. What he meant both times was the same. Stop doing anything that makes my choices visible. The meeting ended without a verdict. That was important. No one declared Dad guilty at the conference table. The representative said she would compare the communications, financial records, Martin Hale's file, Mom's written instructions, and the estate documents before deciding what additional accounting or recovery action was necessary. Outside the building, Amber stopped beside my car. You were right about one thing, she said. Which thing? He was always going to make me carry this if it went bad. I didn't remind her that Mom had been right first. Amber looked exhausted rather than angry. I'm sending you the whole thread. Send it to the personal representative too. She hesitated. All of it? If you want the truth to protect you from Dad, you don't get to edit the parts that protect you from yourself. She hated that answer. Then she nodded. The files arrived that evening. Not screenshots selected for effect, but an exported message thread spanning months. Amber sent the same material to the personal representative, just as I had told her. I opened it at my desk and started with the newest messages, the ones where Dad had changed we into you. Then I worked backward through summer, past the promises Mom had noticed, past April 17th, until I reached a message dated March 6th. I stopped. At the coffee shop, Amber had told me Dad first approached her in March, before the April meeting. But she had described it as the beginning of his fear. Mom was getting weaker. He worried I would take over, and then he started pulling Amber into the cottage problem. The March 6th message showed something more developed. Dad had written, I talked to someone about Elaine's property. We need to get this organized before Meredith starts asking questions. Amber replied. What property? Dad answered, the cottage first. I checked the date again. March 6th, weeks before April 17th. Before Mom sat across from Martin Hale and said no. Before Amber had claimed Dad was only beginning to worry about what might happen. I scrolled upward and found an even earlier line in the thread, dated February 23rd. Dad, once your mother needs more help, we'll have a window to simplify things. Meredith will complicate it if she knows too early. I sat back from the screen. For weeks, I had been asking whether Thomas continued after Mom said no. Now I had a different question. How long before Mom said no had he already been planning around the possibility that she would become dependent enough for him to try? The oldest messages changed the shape of the entire story. Until then, I had believed Dad crossed a line after Mom became harder to care for. I thought stress, money, and fear had slowly pushed him toward decisions he could justify to himself. The February 23rd message told me he had been thinking about control before April 17th. Before Mom sat across from Martin Hale and refused to change the cottage, and before Amber had described herself as deeply involved. Once your mother needs more help, we'll have a window to simplify things. Meredith will complicate it if she knows too early. There was no legal confession hidden inside that sentence. Dad didn't write that he planned to steal Mom's property. He didn't say he intended to forge anything or empty an account, but he had done something almost as important for understanding intent. He had already identified Mom's increasing dependence as an opportunity, already identified me as an obstacle, and already decided information should be controlled before I asked questions. The March 6th message made the sequence even clearer. I talked to someone about Elaine's property. We need to get this organized before Meredith starts asking questions. Amber had replied. What property? Dad answered, the cottage first. That exchange mattered because Amber had told me Dad first pulled her into the problem in March by saying he was scared I would take over after Mom got worse. That was partly true. What she had left out, or perhaps what she had convinced herself was less important, was that Dad was already talking to someone about Mom's property before Amber even knew which property he meant. I sent the full message thread to the personal representative even though Amber already had. I included a short note explaining that I had received the export directly from Amber after the estate meeting and that I had not edited it. Then I did what I had finally learned to do. I stopped interpreting and started aligning dates. The personal representative called 2 days later and asked me to come into her office. She had a timeline spread across the conference table when I arrived. Not a dramatic evidence board with red string, just dates, documents, account statements, Martin Hale's notes, and the message thread printed in chronological order. Dad's investment losses had begun before Mom's mobility significantly worsened. By February, he was already discussing simplifying her property with Amber and describing me as someone who needed to be kept out until things were settled. In March, he specifically identified the cottage. On April 17th, he brought Mom to Martin Hale to discuss a change in control. Mom understood the proposal and said no. 4 days later, Dad returned to Martin alone and asked whether authority he already held could accomplish something similar. Martin refused to help him bypass Mom's decision. 3 days after that, $18,400 left Mom's individual account and went into an account Dad controlled. Over the following weeks, some spending matched legitimate household and medical needs. Other amounts remained unsupported or inconsistent with Mom's documented expenses. By summer, Amber knew Dad's claim that I intended to take the cottage was false. She also knew some of the money Dad was moving came from Mom's funds. She continued helping him keep me away from discussions anyway. After Mom died, Dad tried to retrieve the letters, minimize her understanding, and eventually frame Amber as the person who had handled most of the questionable decisions. I looked at the timeline for a long time. So he started it, I said. The personal representative nodded carefully. The records support that Thomas initiated the strategy involving the cottage before the April meeting. And the account misuse? That requires more precision. I nodded. She pointed to the section covering the liquid funds. Some of the money Thomas handled was used appropriately: utilities, property expenses, insurance, equipment, certain medical costs. We are not going to characterize every transaction as improper because some later transactions raise concerns. What is actually disputed? At this stage, approximately $52,000 in uses or transfers require explanation or repayment because we have not found documentation tying them to Elaine's needs or showing her authorization. I absorbed the number. $52,000 was more serious than the first $18,400 that caught Mom's attention, but it was still not the cartoon version I had once feared, where Dad somehow drained everything while everyone looked away. What about the cottage? The attempted change was not completed. That distinction mattered enough that I wrote it down. Dad had tried to change control of the cottage. Mom said no. Martin refused to bypass her. The cottage remained hers. What happened there was an attempt, the representative said. The account issue is separate. That involves actual use of money. So we don't say he stole the cottage. No, we don't say every household payment was misuse. Correct. We do say Mom refused the cottage change, Dad tried another route, and some later uses of her funds remain unsupported. Yes. And Amber received around $18,000 from Dad while this was happening. Yes, with the same caveat we discussed earlier. The records show she benefited. Her own admissions and messages are what establish when her knowledge changed. I looked down the timeline again. It was strangely satisfying to have the story become narrower. Not bigger. Narrower? For weeks, Dad's defense had depended on making everything sound too complicated to understand. Mom was sick. Marriage finances were complicated. Amber handled things. I hadn't been there. There were bills. There were investments. There was grief. All true. But beneath those truths was a sequence simple enough to say, without exaggeration. Mom said no. Dad kept looking for a way around it. That afternoon, Dad asked to meet me alone. I almost refused. But the personal representative told me she had no objection as long as I understood I was not negotiating estate rights on her behalf. I agreed to meet him in a quiet corner of a hotel lobby downtown, somewhere public enough to discourage theatrics, and private enough that we wouldn't have relatives wandering through. Dad looked older than he had at the diner. That wasn't a moral judgment, he simply did. His shoulders were lower, his face thinner, and he had stopped wearing the expression of a man confident that everyone else would eventually become reasonable. He didn't waste time. I know Amber gave you the texts. She gave them to the estate, too. His jaw tightened. She had no business doing that. They involved Mom's property. They were private conversations between a father and his daughter. Private doesn't mean irrelevant. Dad looked toward the lobby windows. Amber is angry. She has reason to be. That doesn't make her innocent. I know. That answer stopped him. He had expected me to become Amber's advocate because he had turned on her. Instead, I was still sitting in the same place I had been from the beginning. Facts first. Dad rubbed his hands together. I can replace the disputed money. I watched him. All of it? If that's what this is really about? It isn't. His expression hardened slightly. Then what do you want? I almost said Mom back. It would have been true emotionally and useless practically. I want you to stop acting like repayment change is what happened. If the estate is made whole, what else is there? Mom said no. He exhaled. Meredith. She said no to the cottage change. Martin documented it. Then you went back without her and tried to find another route. I was looking at options. After she already answered. I was trying to protect our future. Whose? Our families. I shook my head. That word did a lot of work for you. Dad leaned forward. Don't destroy this family over property. The sentence landed differently than he intended. I thought about the wedding. Amber shoving my chair. Dad looking at my purse instead of my face. Mom's handwriting, leaving the house through June because she no longer trusted what would happen to it inside. You already handled it privately, I said. That's how Mom's note disappeared. Dad stared at me. I never made her sign anything. I know. I never transferred the cottage. I know. Then stop talking like I took it. I'm not. That surprised him too. I continued. The cottage transfer failed. That matters. Some of the money use is disputed. That matters too. Amber knew more than she admitted. She owns that. You started the strategy. You own that. Dad looked almost offended by the separation. You've decided everyone gets a category now? No. I've decided I'm not going to lie just because the truth is inconvenient. He sat back. What do you want me to do? Work with the personal representative. Explain the transactions. Replace anything the estate determines you weren't entitled to use. Stop telling relatives I'm trying to take Amber's inheritance. And stop using Mom's illness to explain away decisions she clearly made. He shook his head. You really think paperwork tells you everything? No, that's why I listen to people too. Amber? Yes. He laughed once, bitterly. Amber will say anything now if it saves her. Maybe. You trust her? No. That seemed to confuse him more than anything else. I didn't trust Amber. I didn't need to. Her messages had dates. Martin's notes had dates. Mom's calendar had dates. Bank records had dates. Amber's own admissions had been witnessed by Nathan in my kitchen. The power of the story no longer depended on believing one damaged family member over another. Dad looked tired. I can put the money back quietly. There it was, quietly. For a moment, I understood exactly why the offer was tempting. Take the repayment. Let probate finish. Tell relatives there had been a misunderstanding. Never explain the letters. Never show anyone the messages. Amber keeps her marriage problems private. Dad keeps some dignity. I stopped being the daughter who tore the family apart. There was another option too. I could do the opposite. I could post everything. Mom's letter. Dad's texts. Amber's replies. The dates. The money. I could send it to every cousin who called me greedy. Every wedding guest who watched Amber throw me out. Every relative who repeated Dad's version without asking me a single question. For a few minutes, both choices felt like power. Then I realized they were just two different ways of letting other people decide what I was trying to accomplish. If I buried it, Dad still controlled the story. If I turned Mom's last months into public entertainment, anger controlled me. I chose neither. I'm not posting anything, I told him. Dad's shoulders loosened slightly. And I'm not stopping the estate review. They tightened again. Then what does that accomplish? The truth goes where it belongs. I left him sitting there. Afterward, I emailed the personal representative a final clean package. Mom's letters, the calendar copies, the April materials, Amber's full message export, and my chronology with sources clearly labeled. Most of it she already had. What changed was that I stopped treating myself as the person who had to force the outcome. The estate counsel and personal representative handled the accounting. They requested explanations. They compared bills. They identified which expenses could be documented and which could not. They sought repayment where appropriate. I did not call the police. I did not threaten Dad with arrest. I did not tell the bank to freeze anything. I did not have that authority, and I no longer needed to pretend strength meant doing every part myself. For relatives who had directly repeated the lie that I was trying to take Amber's inheritance, I sent one short correction. Mom's valid will leaves the lake cottage equally to Amber and me. I am not contesting Amber's share. The estate is reviewing pre-death financial transactions based on records Mom preserved herself. I will not discuss private details beyond that. No screenshots. No letter attached. No family manifesto. Most people never replied. A few apologized. That was enough. Amber came to my house 2 nights later. She looked worse than she had the day she begged to open Mom's letter. Nathan had taken some space and was staying with his brother. Amber told me that herself. She did not call it separation, and I didn't turn it into one. She stood in my kitchen and said, "Dad used me." Yes, her eyes flashed. "That's all you have to say? What do you want me to say? That you understand." "I understand." "Then help me." "With what?" "Make them see he started it." "I already did." "No, I mean make it clear I was manipulated." "You were." She stared at me. "I let the rest come slowly." "He manipulated you. You manipulated Mom. Both things can be true." Amber's face crumpled for a second before she controlled it again. "I never wanted to hurt her. I believe that." "Then why are you treating me like I did?" "Because intent doesn't erase choice." She looked down. I continued. "Dad lied to you about me. Then Mom told you the truth. You kept me out anyway because you were afraid of losing what Dad promised." Amber didn't argue. For the first time, she just stood there and accepted the sentence. Then she asked, "Are you going after my half of the cottage?" I looked at her. "No." She seemed almost disappointed by the answer, as if she had prepared herself to fight. "Why not?" "Because Mom left it to you." Amber gave a short, bitter laugh. "After everything?" "Yes." She stared at me. Before either of us could say more, my phone rang. "Dad." I almost ignored it. Then I answered. His voice was cold. "You should know one thing before you start feeling righteous about any of this." "What?" "Your mother still left Amber half the cottage." I looked at my sister standing 6 feet away. "I know." Dad went silent. I don't think that was the reaction he expected. He had one last weapon left. make me choose between revenge and Mom's actual wishes. He still hadn't understood that by then. Those were no longer the same thing. Dad's last attempt to provoke me failed because he still thought the cottage was the prize. Your mother still left Amber half the cottage. I know. The silence that followed was almost satisfying enough to make me smile, but I didn't. He had expected anger because anger would have returned us to the argument he understood. Two daughters fighting over property while he positioned himself as the exhausted father caught between them. Instead, I already knew the 2022 will left the cottage 50-50 to Amber and me. I had known since probate opened in November. The will was not a secret weapon Mom had hidden in one of her letters, and it had not been rewritten during her illness to reward or punish anyone. It had been signed years before the conflict, when she was healthy enough to drive herself wherever she wanted and nobody was speaking for her. Dad finally said, "Then you understand why all of this is unnecessary." "No. I understand why you're bringing up something that isn't disputed. Amber has rights too." "I know. You don't get to punish her because you're angry with me." "I know that too." That ended the conversation more effectively than shouting could have. Dad had spent months assuming that if I gained enough leverage, I would use it the way he would have. He thought discovering Amber's lies would make me want her half. He thought discovering his financial decisions would make me want control. The possibility that I could be furious and still refuse to replace Mom's choices with my own did not fit the story he had built about me. Amber had the same expectation. A week later, she came to my house after another meeting with the personal representative. By then, the estate review had moved beyond suspicion into accounting. Bills were being matched. Property expenses were being verified. Transfers were being separated into documented household uses, questionable reimbursements, and amounts that had no support showing Mom had authorized them. The process was slow enough to be frustrating and precise enough to be useful. Amber sat at my kitchen table and asked, "Are you going to challenge the will?" "No." She looked suspicious. "Why not?" "Because I don't have a reason to." "You have every reason." "No. I have reasons to be angry with you." "That isn't the same thing." She folded her arms. "You could argue I shouldn't get the cottage after what happened. I could argue a lot of things. Then why aren't you?" I looked at her for a long moment. "Because Mom already decided." Amber's face changed slightly. Not relief yet. She still seemed to be waiting for the condition attached to my answer. "There's no deal," I said. "I'm not asking you to give up your share. I'm not trading silence for property. I'm not telling the estate representative to use your inheritance as punishment." She looked down. "After everything," she said, "you're still letting me keep what Mom left me?" The wording was exactly wrong. "I'm not letting you keep anything. Mom is." That's the difference between us. Amber stared at me. I didn't say it to be cruel. I said it because the whole story had grown out of that distinction. Dad believed 40 years of marriage entitled him to reinterpret Mom's property as family property. Amber believed being the daughter who was physically present entitled her to more influence over what Mom should do. Both of them had spent months taking a woman's dependence and converting it into permission. I wasn't going to win by doing the same thing more elegantly. That did not mean there were no consequences. By March, the estate accounting had identified approximately $52,000 in disputed uses and transfers that Dad could not adequately tie to Mom's documented needs or show she had specifically authorized. Some of the transactions had been ordinary. That mattered. The estate did not pretend every electric bill, insurance payment, pharmacy charge, or cottage expense was suspicious just because Dad had handled it. The disputed amount was what remained after legitimate expenses were separated out. Dad argued. Then he produced records. Then the representative matched those records against dates, account histories, and Mom's preserved notes. Some amounts were removed from the disputed total because Dad documented them properly. Others stayed. There was no dramatic afternoon when a judge slammed a gavel and ordered him to hand over $52,000 before dinner. The process took months. Dad had counsel involved. The estate had its own professional administration. By late spring, the pressure of the records had narrowed the choices enough that Dad agreed to repay and account for the disputed amount from his own resources. rather than drag the estate into a prolonged civil fight. He hated the word repay. He preferred restore, then reimburse, then resolve. I didn't care which verb made it easier for him to sign. What mattered was that the estate was made whole for the documented amount under dispute. Dad also lost something money could not repair. While Mom was alive, he had possessed legitimate authority to manage certain financial tasks because she needed practical help. That authority ended when she died. He never had the power after her death to continue deciding what happened to her estate, and the independent personal representative made sure everyone understood that. By spring, even relatives who once called Dad automatically whenever there was a question about Mom's property had learned to stop treating him as the final voice. If someone wanted to know what Mom's will said, they asked the estate representative. If someone wanted to know what happened at Martin Hale's office, they looked at Martin's contemporaneous file. If someone wanted to know whether Mom had agreed to something, they looked for Mom's actual words. Dad's greatest loss was not the money. It was that his interpretation stopped outranking everyone else's evidence. Amber's consequences developed differently. The roughly $18,000 Dad had transferred to her became harder to dismiss once her messages and her own admissions established when her knowledge changed. I never claimed she knew the source of the earliest payment. The records didn't prove that, and Amber said she initially believed Dad was helping from his own savings. I accepted that as plausible, but by summer 2025, she knew two things. Mom's will was not designed to give me everything, and some of the money Dad was moving had come from Mom's funds. Amber had continued accepting the benefit after that. Once the estate accounting clarified the issue, she agreed to return approximately $18,000 rather than force a larger fight over what she knew and when. She complained. She cried. She told me at least twice that returning it would put pressure on her finances because some of the money had gone toward wedding expenses and debt. I did not offer to cover the pressure. That sounds obvious now. But old family systems survive because obvious boundaries become negotiable the moment someone cries. Amber had a husband. She had income. She had assets. She had choices. Her financial problem was not mine to absorb. She still kept the 50% of the cottage Mom had validly left her. The social consequence was harder for her. For years, relatives had called Amber whenever they wanted to know how Mom was doing. After Mom died, that habit continued. People asked Amber what Mom really wanted, what Dad really meant, why I was angry, whether the cottage was supposed to stay with one branch of the family, whether Mom had been confused. By summer, that stopped. Not because I launched some campaign against my sister, because enough people had learned what happened when they accepted one person's version without checking. Aunt Diane called me in May and apologized. Not dramatically. She just said, "I repeated something Thomas told me about you fighting Amber over the cottage. I should have asked you first. Thank you. I'm sorry. I appreciate that. I didn't punish her for being late, and I didn't absolve everyone with a speech about family healing. Some people apologized. Some quietly changed their behavior. A few never admitted they had been wrong at all. That was real life. The important change was smaller. Family members started contacting each other directly. Amber no longer served as the switchboard. Dad no longer served as the authority. Nobody got to say, "Elaine wanted this," without someone eventually asking, "Where did she say that?" Nathan's reaction took longer. I saw him in April after an estate-related meeting. He caught up with me in the parking lot and asked if he could talk for a minute. I expected him to defend Amber or ask me to ease up on the estate process. He did neither. "I moved out for a while," he said. I looked at him. "Amber told me you were taking space. I'm in a short-term rental." "Okay," he almost smiled. "That's it? What do you want me to say?" "I don't know." I leaned against my car. Nathan looked tired. "I'm not asking you what I should do about my marriage." "Good, because I'm not giving you that advice." He nodded. "My problem isn't the cottage," he said. "It's not even the money by itself." I waited. "It's that I keep remembering things Amber told me about you. Things about your mom, things about your dad, And now I don't know which ones she saw happen and which ones were versions she built because she needed them to be true. That was exactly the consequence I had predicted without wanting it. Amber's weapon had always been narrative control. She decided who was selfish, who was helpful, who upset Mom, who understood the family, who belonged at the table. Now the person closest to her no longer accepted her stories automatically. "Do you think she lies about everything?" Nathan asked. "I don't know." "You don't?" "No." He seemed surprised. "I know what I can prove about what happened with Mom. I know what Amber admitted. I'm not going to turn that into a diagnosis of your entire marriage." Nathan nodded slowly. "That's probably fair. I'm trying." He looked back toward the building. "I haven't filed for divorce. I didn't ask." "I know. I just don't want people saying that's what happened." "I won't. I need time." "That sounds like something you should tell Amber." I did. We left it there. I never became Nathan's advisor. I never encouraged him to stay. I never encouraged him to leave. If Amber's marriage survived, it would not be because I covered for her. If it ended, it would not be because I demanded punishment. That decision belonged to the two people in it. Dad did not respect that same distinction. By June, most of the financial terms had been resolved. He asked me to meet him at the house. I considered saying no, then decided there was value in hearing what he had left to say, now that money was no longer an argument he could use to stall the facts. Mom's chair was still beside the living room window. The paper calendar was gone because it had become part of the estate records, and the empty space on the wall bothered me more than I expected. Dad stood near the fireplace. "You got what you wanted," he said. I took off my coat. "What do you think I wanted?" "The money is being restored." Amber returned hers. "Everyone thinks I'm some criminal." "I haven't called you a criminal." "You didn't have to." "Dad, you keep trying to argue with things I haven't said." He laughed bitterly. "You broke this family over money." There it was. The final version. Not Amber lied. Not I ignored Elaine's refusal. Not I went back to Martin after she said no. Not I moved money while hiding investment losses. Meredith broke the family. I looked at him and realized how little his defense had changed since January. Only the villain in his story had. At first, I had been the daughter who would take over. Then Amber had been the daughter who handled everything. Now, I was the daughter who destroyed everyone by refusing to stay quiet. "You decided Mom's no didn't count," I said. "Everything after that came from you." Dad's face hardened. "I was scared." "I believe you." That answer surprised him. "I lost money. I thought I could recover it." "I believe that too." "I was trying to protect us." "No. You were trying to protect the version of yourself who hadn't made the mistake." He looked away. That was the closest I came to raising my voice. "You could have told Mom you lost money. You could have asked her for help. You could have accepted no. Instead, you decided being her husband meant you got another answer if you disliked the first one." Dad sat down. For the first time in months, he looked less defensive than ashamed. "I loved her. I know. You don't sound like you know. I know you loved Mom. That's part of why this is so hard to excuse." He closed his eyes. I didn't comfort him. I also didn't tell him he was beyond redemption. Those were two different forms of control, and I was finished deciding what other people were allowed to become. When I left, Dad did not ask me to keep the conversation private. That was progress, however small. Amber called later that same week and asked if we could meet at the cottage. The transfer under Mom's will was still being completed, but by then there was no dispute about the outcome. Half to me, half to Amber. We stood on the porch looking across the lake. Summer had finally returned to Michigan, and the dock was back in the water. For the first time since Mom died, the place looked like somewhere people could live instead of somewhere evidence had happened. Amber rested her hands on the railing. "I don't know what happens with Nathan." "I know. I don't know what happens with Dad." "Neither do I." She glanced at me. "And us?" That was harder. She looked back at the lake. "Is there any way back to being sisters?" Months earlier, I would have answered too quickly. Either yes, because family should forgive, or no, because boundaries meant never allowing anyone another chance. By then, I understood that both answers could become ways of avoiding the harder question. What would Amber actually do with the truth once nobody was forcing her to face it? I didn't give her an answer that afternoon. I didn't give Amber an answer at the cottage that afternoon because I had finally stopped treating forgiveness like a door that had to be either locked forever or thrown open the moment somebody knocked. For most of my life, I believed boundaries were simple. If someone disrespected you, leave. If someone lies to you, stop trusting them. If a room makes you feel small, find another room. Those instincts had protected me, and I wasn't interested in pretending they were suddenly wrong because Mom was gone and everyone wanted a softer ending. But the months after Amber's wedding taught me that walking away could protect my dignity while also making me easier to exclude. Amber knew I would never beg for access. Dad knew I would not pound on Mom's door after being told she needed rest. They had taken something true about me, my pride, my respect for boundaries, my refusal to force myself where I was unwanted, and used it against me. That did not make their choices my fault. It meant there was something about myself I needed to understand. So when Amber stood beside me on the cottage porch and asked, "Is there any way back to being sisters?" I didn't say yes or no. I said, "I don't know yet." She turned toward me. "What does that mean?" I told her I wasn't going to restore our relationship because she had finally admitted what happened, and I wasn't going to decide that nothing she ever did afterward could matter either. "If there's a way back," I said, "it won't happen because you asked. It'll happen because of what you do next." Amber looked toward the water. "So I have to prove myself?" "No. I'm not giving you tests. You either start telling people what you actually know instead of what makes you feel safer, or you don't. You either stop speaking for me, Dad, Nathan, and everyone else, or you don't. And you don't get to decide when we're sisters again just because you're tired of the consequences." She winced, but for once she didn't reach for Dad, Mom's illness, or everything she had done for the family. She just said, "Okay." That one word repaired nothing, but it was more useful than another apology. By then, the estate review had moved into the least dramatic and most important phase. Bills were matched against account records. Legitimate household expenses were separated from disputed uses. Dad produced receipts, insurance statements, medical bills, cottage maintenance costs, and other records. Some transactions I had once looked at suspiciously turned out to be ordinary. He had paid for Mom's mobility equipment, insurance premiums, property expenses, and repairs. I was glad those things checked out. I had never wanted every dollar Dad touched to become evidence against him. If evidence mattered when it hurt him, it had to matter when it helped him too. Other transactions could not be justified as easily. By late spring, after legitimate expenses were removed, the remaining disputed amount was substantial enough that Dad faced a choice between continuing a prolonged fight or restoring the questioned money to the estate. He chose to resolve it. He hated the word repay. He preferred restore, reconcile, or settle. I didn't care which verb made it easier for him to sign. The money went back. Amber returned the money she had received as well. No one claimed she knew where the earliest payment came from. The records didn't prove that, and I believed she could initially have thought Dad was helping her from his own savings. But by summer 2025, Mom had told Amber directly that the cottage was not being left solely to me. Amber also knew some of the money Dad was moving came from Mom's accounts. She continued accepting help and helping him keep me away from important conversations anyway. That was the line I refused to blur. Dad manipulated Amber. Then Amber learned enough to question him and chose not to stop. Both things were true. The cottage passed exactly as Mom's 2022 will directed. 50% to Amber and 50% to me. That confused both Dad and Amber more than any punishment I could have designed. Dad had spent months portraying me as the daughter who would appear the moment Mom weakened and take control. Amber had believed she needed to protect herself before I somehow ended up with everything. Then, when I finally had enough evidence to challenge what they had done, I refused to challenge Amber's inheritance. She asked me more than once, "You really aren't going after my half?" "No." "Even after everything?" "Yes. You could argue I don't deserve it. I could argue a lot of things. That doesn't make them Mom's decision." She stared at the table. "So you're letting me keep it?" I'm not letting you keep anything. Mom is. That's the difference between us. I continued before she could answer. You and Dad spent months treating Mom's decisions like suggestions because you thought your reasons were better. I'm not going to finish this by deciding my reasons are better too. After a long silence, she asked, "What if Mom was wrong to leave it to me?" She was allowed to be wrong. It was hers. If I had taken Amber's share, she could have framed the ending as another fight between sisters. Instead, she had to live with the fact that the woman whose choices she helped override had still chosen to include her. There was no bargain available. Amber could not surrender the cottage and purchase forgiveness. She had to accept what Mom gave her and decide what kind of person she would become while holding it. Owning a lake cottage equally with a sister I barely trusted created its own practical problem, and I refused to turn it into another emotional test. The estate representative gave us ordinary options. Sell it, one of us buy out the other, or keep it jointly under a written agreement. Mom had loved that cottage. Her parents owned it before her, and Amber and I had grown up swimming off the dock, complaining about mosquitoes, and sleeping in the living room after summer storms knocked out the power. Those memories mattered, but they did not mean we had to preserve a building forever if sharing it became toxic. We chose the least dramatic option. We would keep it for 1 year, divide documented expenses evenly, schedule visits through a shared calendar, and reconsider later. Amber frowned when I suggested putting everything in writing. A contract between sisters? Especially between sisters. She rolled her eyes, but she signed. So did I. It was the first decision we made about Mom's property, where neither of us pretended love should replace clarity. June visited the cottage in July, carrying a blueberry pie and the same kind of mystery novel she used to bring Mom. Amber came later with iced tea, and for a while we talked about ordinary things. The dock, the railing, June's neighbor, and a restaurant Amber thought was overrated. Eventually, Amber looked toward the empty space where Mom's paper calendar had once hung. You knew she didn't trust Dad with those papers. June didn't soften her answer. Your mother trusted Thomas with many things. At the end, those papers were not one of them. Amber's face tightened. I still can't believe she didn't tell me everything. June put down her fork. Elaine did tell you things. She told you no about the cottage. She told you Meredith wasn't inheriting everything. She told you she understood her own finances. The problem wasn't that your mother didn't speak. The problem was everyone around her got comfortable deciding which things she said mattered. Months earlier, Amber would have defended herself until June stopped talking. Instead, she nodded. That's fair. June frowned. Don't agree with me because you want points. Amber smiled slightly. I don't think you've given me points since I was 12. You didn't earn many at 12 either. For the first time since Mom died, the three of us laughed in that cottage, without grief swallowing the sound. That afternoon, I understood something I had missed when I first opened Letter 2. Mom had not chosen me because she thought I was morally superior to Amber. If that had been her intention, Letter 1 would have declared me right and Amber wrong. It didn't. Mom understood both of us. Amber needed to feel indispensable. Once Mom depended on her for rides, appointments, and family updates, usefulness slowly became authority in Amber's mind. She began confusing access with ownership. My weakness was quieter. I prided myself on being independent and respecting other people's boundaries. When Mom was supposedly tired or didn't want visitors, I stepped back. After enough rejection, pride took over, and I stopped checking whether the rejection had actually come from Mom. Mom's letter never blamed me for the deception. It simply showed me how something I considered a strength had made their deception easier. Dad's weakness was shame. He had spent decades thinking of himself as the stable husband and provider. Admitting an investment loss felt worse to him than quietly rearranging things until the failure disappeared. Amber's usefulness became control. Dad's responsibility became entitlement. My independence became withdrawal. Nathan and Amber did not repair their marriage through one emotional conversation. He stayed in a short-term rental for several weeks after the messages came out, and they began counseling. Amber told me that much and stopped there. The old Amber would have repeated every conversation and expected me to decide whether Nathan was being fair. The first time he returned to a family gathering, I noticed he had started asking direct questions. Dad mentioned that Amber was thinking about replacing the cottage cabinets. Nathan looked at her and asked, "Is that what you want?" Amber said, "I looked at prices. I haven't decided anything." Dad shrugged. "Same difference," Nathan answered. "Not really. Most people barely noticed. Amber did. So did I." The person closest to her had learned not to accept somebody else's interpretation as her answer. Nathan caught me alone later and asked, "Do you think Amber lies about everything?" It would have been easy to hurt my sister through him. I had credibility now. One carefully phrased sentence could have turned his uncertainty into suspicion about their entire marriage. "No," I said. He looked surprised. "You don't?" "I know what she lied about with Mom. I know what she admitted. I know what the messages show. I don't know every conversation in your marriage." Nathan looked down. "I keep thinking about things she told me about you. Now I don't know which ones were true." "Then ask her. What if I don't trust the answer?" "That's something the two of you have to work out." He smiled faintly. "You're not very helpful." "I'm extremely helpful. I'm just not taking over your marriage." Before leaving, he told me he had not filed for divorce. I said okay. His marriage was his decision. If it survived, it would not be because I covered for Amber. If it failed, it would not be because I pushed him out the door. Dad's consequences were quieter and harder for him. The money mattered, but authority mattered more. For almost 40 years, his interpretation often ended conversations. If he said Mom was exhausted, people accepted that she was exhausted. If he called the cottage family property, nobody asked how it was titled. If he said Amber handled everything, people assumed Amber had made the decisions. That changed. Questions about the estate went to the independent personal representative. Questions about April 17th were answered by Martin Hale's records. Questions about Mom's will were answered by the will. If anyone said, "Elaine would have wanted," somebody eventually asked, "Where did she say that?" Dad hated losing that authority. Not everyone decided he was a monster. Some relatives defended him. Others believed he had made serious mistakes while frightened and ashamed. But people stopped accepting his version automatically. He called me after almost 3 weeks of silence. Instead of apologizing, he asked whether I had been to the cottage. "Last weekend." "How's the railing?" "Bad. I told your mother 5 years ago it needed replacing." "She told you she wanted cedar." "Cedar costs more." She knew. We talked about the railing for several minutes because Dad was still Dad and some people approached shame from the side. Eventually he said, "I've been thinking about what you told me." "Which part?" "That I was protecting the version of myself who hadn't made the investment mistake." I waited. "You weren't entirely wrong." "What part was wrong?" He was silent. "I did think I was protecting the family." "I believe you thought that." Another pause. "I should have told Elaine how much I lost." "Yes. I thought I could recover it before she knew." "I know. And when she said no about the cottage, I should have stopped." I closed my eyes. That was the sentence I had wanted from him since January. Hearing it didn't feel like victory. It felt like setting down something heavy. "Yes," I said. Dad exhaled. "You could make this a little easier." "No." After a pause, he laughed, tired and embarrassed. "I suppose I earned that." That conversation did not restore our relationship. I set the same basic rule with Dad and Amber. No communication through other people. If Dad was angry with me, he told me. If he wanted Amber to know something, he told Amber. If a relative asked what I thought, he didn't answer for me. Most importantly, if he said, "Your mother would have wanted," he had to be prepared for the question that had changed our family. Where did she say that? He hated the rule, which probably meant we needed it. Once, While discussing the cottage, he started saying, "Your mother would have wanted you to," then stopped. "Fine. I think she would have wanted you to keep it. That's different. You know what I meant." "Yes. Now everyone else does too." He rolled his eyes, but the distinction held. The wider family did not heal in one scene either. Aunt Diane called me and apologized for repeating Dad's claim that I was trying to take the cottage from Amber. "I should have asked you." "Yes." She seemed surprised. I didn't immediately say it was fine. "I'm sorry. I appreciate that." One cousin never apologized but stopped bringing the issue up. Another sent a long message claiming she had secretly suspected something was wrong all along. I didn't answer. She had called me greedy in January, and rewriting yourself as secretly perceptive after the outcome is clear is another kind of dishonesty. Some relatives stayed close to Dad. Some became more cautious around Amber. Some stepped away from all of us. I let them. The most meaningful change was practical. People started calling each other directly. Aunt Diane asked me whether I was coming to a gathering instead of asking Dad. A cousin asked Amber whether she wanted to use the cottage for Labor Day instead of asking me what Amber planned. Nobody called Amber to ask how I felt. Nobody accepted Dad as the final authority on both daughters. The original abuse of power had depended on information moving through people who benefited from shaping it. Direct communication took that weapon away. By late July, Amber and I had settled into something that wasn't closeness, but wasn't war either. We texted about cottage expenses. Occasionally, one of us sent the other something Mom would have loved or hated. Amber once sent me a picture of a wooden sign that said, "Lake life is the best life," and wrote, "Mom would have thrown this into the water." I replied, "She would have made Dad return it first so he could get his money back." Amber sent a laughing emoji. It was the first time we joked about Mom without grief swallowing the joke. I didn't call it healing. I had become suspicious of large emotional labels. It was one honest moment. Then another. On the first Saturday in August, 7 months after Amber's wedding, I drove to the cottage alone. The new cedar railing had finally been installed. Dad paid half the cost without being asked. Amber and I split the rest. I accepted his contribution without turning a repaired railing into redemption. The lake was bright beneath a clear sky, nothing like the gray winter morning when I had first driven there looking for answers. Most of Mom's belongings had been distributed. Her paper calendar was no longer on the wall. After the estate review ended, it had been returned to me, and I kept it in a box with her letters, instead of turning April 17th into a shrine. I brought letter 1 with me. For my daughters opened together. The envelope was worn, the pages soft at the folds. I sat on the porch and read the final paragraph again. I read Mom's final paragraph again. By then, I understood what she had really asked of us. Find out what she had said yes to, what she had said no to, and stop replacing her decisions with our own. Her last instruction stayed with me more than anything else. Then let my decisions be mine. The first time I read those words, I thought Mom had given me a task. By August, I understood she had also given me a limit. Find the truth. Do not improve it. Do not exaggerate it. Do not use it to take something she never gave me. Dad lost money. He lost authority and the comfort of having his version accepted first. Amber returned money. She lost trust and the family role she had built around being the daughter everyone called for answers. Those consequences mattered. I won't pretend I felt no satisfaction when Dad's own records contradicted him or when Amber's saved messages stopped him from making her the sole scapegoat. But the most satisfying part wasn't that they lost. It was that Mom's choices survived them. Dad did not get the cottage. Amber did not get more because she was physically closer. I did not get more because I uncovered the truth. Mom said 50-50. It stayed 50-50. Mom said no to changing control of the cottage. Her no stayed no. She authorized Dad to handle legitimate expenses. Those expenses remained legitimate. She did not authorize every later use of her money. Those uses were questioned and addressed. Nobody got to simplify the truth, just to make the ending more satisfying. Amber arrived later that afternoon after texting first. She brought groceries and 2 folding chairs. I looked at them. What are those? Chairs. I can see that. The porch chairs are terrible. They belong to Mom. They were terrible when Mom was alive too. Amber sat in one of her new chairs. I stayed in Mom's old one out of principle. After a while, she noticed the envelope beside me. You brought the letter. Yes. I still think about the wedding. So do I. I'm sorry. I know. She looked toward the lake. I hated you when you walked out. I gathered that from the chair. I thought you were taking the letter to punish me. I wasn't. I know that now. Then she became quiet. I was terrified. Of what Mom wrote? Of what she knew. For the first time, Amber explained those 3 days without trying to make herself look better. When she saw Mom's handwriting at the wedding, she remembered Mom had confronted Dad before she died. Amber knew she had lied to me about April 17th but didn't know how much Mom had documented. After I left, Dad asked where the letter was. When Amber told him I had taken it, he looked frightened. Then he called June. June mentioned written instructions. Afterward, Dad admitted Mom had confronted him about the April meeting. That was why Amber started texting me, and why she came to my house 3 days later begging to know what Mom left us. Why didn't you tell me then? Because if I told you Dad was afraid of what Mom wrote, you would know there was something to find. I found it anyway. I know. She looked at her hands. I thought controlling what you knew would protect me. How did that work? Badly. I laughed before I could stop myself. Amber laughed too. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a moment. Then she said, I don't expect you to trust me. Good. That was fast. You said something accurate. She smiled faintly. I do want to be your sister again. You are my sister. You know what I mean? Yes. I thought about what I told her months earlier. She didn't get to decide when we were sisters again. By August, I understood that line applied to me too. I could not demand that Amber remain frozen forever, as the worst thing she had done, simply because keeping her there made my boundaries easier. I'm not ready to trust you with everything, I said. I know. I'm not pretending Dad manipulated you into every choice you made. I know. If you ever tell someone a version of me instead of asking me directly, we're going to have a problem. I know. Could you stop saying that? Amber laughed. Sorry. I looked at her. But I also don't want to spend 10 years making you apologize every time we sit in the same room. What does that mean? It means we start where we actually are. Where's that? 2 sisters who jointly own a cottage and have terrible taste in porch chairs? My chairs are better than yours. Your chairs are plastic. They don't attack your spine. That builds character. Maybe that was our beginning. Not a hug. Not forgetting. 2 women sitting beside a lake, knowing exactly what happened and refusing to pretend we were either completely healed or permanently destroyed by it. When I left that evening, Amber stayed behind. At the end of the driveway, I stopped the car and looked back once. 7 months earlier, she had shoved my chair away from a family table and told me I didn't belong. At the time, I thought leaving was the strongest thing I could do. It was the right thing to do. But it wasn't the end. I came back for the truth. Not for the seat, not for Dad's approval, not so relatives would tell me I was a good daughter. I checked what Mom actually said. I checked what Dad actually did. I checked when Amber actually knew. I made mistakes. I confronted Dad too early and revealed more than I should have, giving him time to shape the family narrative against me. The old version of me might have responded by escalating, calling everyone, sending documents, proving myself in every direction. Instead, I learned. I stopped confusing being right with being strategic. I separated facts from assumptions. I preserved evidence. I let professionals do the jobs I did not have the authority to do. I stopped treating every accusation as something that required my defense. And when I finally had enough information to hurt the people who hurt me, I used only what was necessary to restore what Mom had actually decided. There were nights when I wanted every wedding guest to receive a copy of Mom's letter. There were moments when I wanted every relative to read Dad's messages. I could have justified it. Truth can become a convincing disguise for revenge. But Mom had spent her final months fighting one specific harm: people using their reasons to override her choices. I wasn't going to honor her by doing the same thing with better evidence. So Dad kept whatever relationships people chose to maintain with him. Amber kept the inheritance Mom chose to leave her. Nathan made his own decisions about his marriage. Relatives decided whether to apologize. I decided where my boundaries went. No one got everything they wanted. Everyone got more truth than they were comfortable with. That was enough. When I think about Mom now, I try not to let April 17th become the center of her final year. She was more than what happened to her. She complained about therapy. She beat June at cards and accused her of cheating. She hated one neighbor's wind chimes. She once spent 20 minutes arguing with me about whether I was overwatering a houseplant. She was physically limited, sometimes exhausted, sometimes frightened, and still completely herself. That was what Dad and Amber forgot. Mom needed someone to drive. That didn't mean someone else got to choose the destination. She needed help with bills. That didn't mean someone else owned the money. She needed people nearby. That didn't give them the right to speak for her. And she needed love. Love did not mean obedience. The last thing my mother taught me was not how to win an inheritance fight. She taught me that help becomes control when the person receiving it is no longer allowed to say no. She also taught me something about myself. I still believe you should not beg for a place at a table where someone wants to humiliate you. But before you walk away from someone you love, make sure the rejection actually belongs to them and not to the person standing between you. I wish I had learned that while Mom was alive. I wish I had called twice when Amber said she was tired. I wish I had asked Mom directly when Dad said she wanted space. Those regrets belong to me. They do not make Amber's lies my fault, and they do not make Dad's choices my responsibility. They simply tell me what I would do differently now. So I call people directly. I ask what they mean. I no longer accept the family thinks without asking which family member actually said it. I don't confuse silence with agreement, and I never assume a person who needs help has surrendered the right to make inconvenient choices. 7 months earlier, my sister shoved my chair back and said, "This table is for real family." I left. My revenge was not leaving. My revenge was returning to the truth without asking anyone to give me that seat back. It was watching Dad's excuses shrink until his own words contradicted them. It was watching Amber realize that being manipulated did not erase what she chose after she knew better. It was refusing to become cruel simply because cruelty had become available to me. Most of all, it was making sure the woman everyone had begun speaking for got the final word. Mom said no. It stayed no. Mom left half to Amber. It stayed Amber's. Mom left half to me. I kept mine. No one got to improve her answer. No one got to replace it. Dad and Amber had spent months trying to control what Mom's dependence would mean. In the end, the only thing that mattered was what Mom herself had meant. And for the first time, in a very long time, nobody spoke over her. When someone you love becomes physically dependent, never assume they have lost the right to make decisions. Ask them directly. Verify what they truly want, and respect their no. Protect boundaries without surrendering truth to louder voices. If this story taught you something, subscribe for more stories with hard-earned lessons.